You mentioned that on-premise business. Do you get concerned at all if it doesn't come back as quickly as we thought?
Well, it is one of the factors that was somewhat negative on this quarter. It's what we expected, and what we guided to. And we do expect some recovery as we're looking to our pipeline in Q4. And as the economy comes back, we expect it to come back as well, largely aligned with the economy next year. Now, we do, and I've called it the 3 laws of the on-premise cloud, right? Laws of economics, laws of physics, and laws of the land. There's lots of areas that they need it on-premise for regulatory reasons. Laws of economics. It's cheaper for an at-scale private cloud than moving to the public cloud. And finally, the laws of physics. And this is where like edge computing and 5G will have more things on-premise because you need that very low latency for robotics and smart cities and 5G and edge environments. So overall, we're quite confident that the foundational reasons people will build on-premise remain the same, even as we've seen an acceleration of the cloud and SaaS offerings in the near term.
You also have unique insight into how customers are thinking about spending or not. How do you generally look at IT spend in this moment and amid some of the uncertainty that we experience?
Well, overall, I've been on record that we're in a decade good cycle for tech spend. Digital transformation is more important than ever. And if there's a moment in history where that's been the case, the pandemic period has been at work from anywhere, telehealth, educate from anywhere. So overall, it is a good cycle for tech, and we don't expect that to end for several years into the future. So I look at it as GDP, and IT spend will be better than GDP, and software spend and cloud spend will be better than IT spend. So overall, that order, and while they may come down in an economic cycle, they're also going to come up in that order as things come back as well. So we're overall, tech spend strong, software and cloud spend even stronger, and that's our outlook for next year and for the years beyond.
Wonderful. Pat Gelsinger, VMware CEO, always great to have you on the program. Apple, PlayStation, and Peloton, we have a review of some of the most popular consumer tech devices that many will be looking to buy this Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Are they worth the hype? This is Bloomberg.
We have some good news in terms of vaccines and a chance to overcome the health crisis, but we are not there yet.
We need the fiscal stimulus, and we need it relatively quickly, because I can see where the second wave's coming. You can see consumer spending beginning to get impacted again.
What we need is surveillance to be stronger. We need public health measures, because you have nowhere at the beginning. This is your best weapon, and you need to use it well.
The good news is that both the vaccines and the therapeutics, in particular the antibodies, are coming along and will start to bring that number way down.
We don't just need more investment in public health. We must also rethink how we value health.
I do believe a targeted fiscal stimulus is going to be in order to really begin a more equalized economy.
Black Friday and Cyber Monday are upon us, and there are 4 hot tech devices competing for consumer dollars and attention. Bloomberg reporter Mark Gurman gives Emily Chang the rundown in a segment we like to call Power Up.
All right, Mark, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our inaugural segment of Power Up with Mark Gurman. I want to start talking about the new iPhones. There are 4 new iPhone 12s out this year. I know you've been using the iPhone 12 Pro Max, which is the biggest one, but you've also tried out 4 of them. Which is the one to buy? How are they working? Does 5G work? And who should be upgrading this year?
I've been using the 12 Pro Max, and it's a big phone. I've seen some people call it a lot of iPhone, and I really love that big, larger screen, the better camera. But I do wish that Apple would take better advantage of that screen real estate. It would be really nice to be able to do 2 apps side by side. So I think if you're having an iPhone 11 or coming from an iPhone 11 right now, you really don't need to update because 5G is still in its infancy. The speeds I've seen are not as fast as one would immediately expect or what Apple is really marketing. But if you're on an iPhone 10 or older, I think that now's the time to upgrade because of that new camera, the screen improvements and such. The carriers have all sorts of deals. So if you're going to AT&T and trading in a phone, you can practically get the phone if you get the iPhone 12 mini for $0 a month or $10 a month for the 12 Pro or around $15 for the Pro Max. So there are some good deals out there, and I would take a look depending on your carrier to see what's up.
Talk to us about the wireless charging situation, because this is the first time that Apple didn't include the charging brick in the box.
Yeah, I mean, the situation is a little complicated because they still have the charging port at the bottom of the phone, but they have now is this new MagSafe charging cable. Now, the problem is the cable is $40. The phone doesn't come with the brick. So really, to use wireless charging, you need to buy that $40 cable plus the $20 brick. And now they have this 2-device charger, the MagSafe Duo, where you have to buy a different brick to get the full charging speed. So it's basically $180 to get the full wireless charging experience. And there's probably much better third-party options on the market.
You've also been trying out the HomePod Mini. How does it stack up to other models from Amazon, Google, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, the HomePod, when it first launched a few years ago for $350, I was really optimistic about the quality and the technology, but the price was way too high. There were lots of issues related to Siri and HomeKit integration and stuff like that. Those really haven't been solved, but now at $99 with pretty decent sound quality, they took out the biggest barrier to entry. So I think it's a good purchase if you're in that Apple ecosystem.
You've also been trying out the new Sony PS5, and all the talk online is about just how hard it is to get. Is it worth the wait? And what are your big takeaways?
Yeah, you're right. The wait is intense. I've seen people paying well over $1,100, $1,200 to not want to wait for it to ship. The graphics on the PS5, they can go up to 8K if you have a TV. I don't know who has one yet that supports it, but it'll be there for you, are just amazing. I've been playing NBA 2K, and you can really see the sweat dripping off the players' faces. Everything looks super realistic. So if you want the latest and greatest in gaming technology, and you've already bought a ton of PS4 games, that's probably the better option for you versus the new Xbox.
And speaking of wait times, wait time for new Peloton bikes has also been a talker. What's coming down the road for Peloton, especially over the holiday seasons? I imagine this is going to be a popular gift item. Have they managed to bring down the wait times?
Yeah, Emily, unfortunately, really have not managed to bring down the wait times. I actually spoke to Peloton CEO John Foley a few days ago, and he told me his aim is to get back into a supply-demand balance around Q3, which is around April, May for Peloton. But the important thing to note is their new cheaper treadmill, which is almost $2,000 cheaper than the original model, that's not shipping in the U.S. until end of March, so that's going to miss the key holiday season.
That was Bloomberg's Mark Gurman and Emily Chang. And coming up, we just heard about Peloton bikes potentially not making it to their destinations because of supply chains and shipping. What other shipping delays are anticipated as the holiday shopping season gets into full swing? We'll find out, and we do it next. This is Bloomberg.
Market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Taylor Riggs in New York. In a normal year, Black Friday kicks off the holiday shopping frenzy where retailers can make about a fourth of their annual sales. But it's a 2020, it's a pandemic year. So in this new normal, holiday peg shopping, well, it began a little bit earlier, all in part because of online shopping. But now more than ever, delivery times are in question. Amazon merchants around the U.S. say that deliveries of some products are being delayed. To discuss, we're joined by Melissa Burdick, PackView co-founder and president. Melissa, I think it was the first portion of that really stood out to me in that I felt like my Black Friday sales came a month ago. Am I right?
Absolutely. Actually, you know, really, it kind of kicked off with Amazon pushing their Prime Day from July to kind of the middle of October as a way to pull forward demand into the holidays. And that really did kind of kick off the holiday season. So instead of the 5 days of Cyber Friday, you know, or I'm sorry, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, we're really having like a month of Black Friday deals all month long.
And is this permanent? Is this structural? Am I ever going to walk into a mall again?
You know, I had my Thanksgiving meal delivered to me for the very first time. I avoided, you know, going to Costco and to Whole Foods where I normally shop, and I got it delivered through Instacart and grocery pickup through Whole Foods, and the experience was magical, and I don't know if I'm going back. So I think that a lot of the shopping behavior will stick. Actually, Instacart released some data around their customer information, and they said that 86% of their users are likely to keep using Instacart in the future, and that 89% see Instacart as an essential service. So I wouldn't say that this is, you know, permanent, you know, for any means, but it's definitely a behavior that's going to stick. Certainly around, you know, very busy holiday timeframes, and especially when people have such great experiences like I did, they're likely to do it again.
And my producers are some of those who love the convenience of it, and pointing out that DoorDash, for example, also doing deliveries for the traditional brick and mortar stores. I'm wondering if you think that that's a great way for them to also look to the future to pivot, to partner with some of these companies, because otherwise they might be left struggling.
Absolutely. And we saw a very interesting partnership last week announced with Instacart and Best Buy. Instacart's traditionally a, you know, grocery kind of marketplace and platform. And, you know, a lot of stores are closed tomorrow for Thanksgiving. And so the last mile delivery, you know, opportunity is hard. So, you know, having this ability to partner with last mile delivery like DoorDash, like Instacart, and like others is definitely a smart way to help what we're calling Shipageddon this year, and probably, kind of going forward, kind of different models that people are trying out to be able to get products to people faster.
You mentioned Shipageddon, and it seemed like, I'm using Amazon, for example, really tried to transform to be a logistics company, and yet no one had predicted this massive surge in online shipping. Really, that has been the story of 2020. How many delays are we expected to see this year?
It's going to be significant. I mean, Amazon has been predicting this. That is why they started early and they moved their Prime Day into October as a pull forward mechanism. And then we see a lot of messaging across a lot of retailer sites and direct-to-consumer sites saying, shop early, shop now, with shipping cutoffs as early as December 5th. So that I've seen, at least. So it's a true thing that's going to happen. I think that, Amazon's poised to be a big winner because they're just amazing executors and they have the logistics built out a lot better than others do. So we are going to see it. That's why I think we're going to have a huge Cyber 5 weekend coming up, because people are going to be buying now because they know that, they're going to expect delays in their orders.
Yeah, on those delays, is there any backlash? I remember in the peak of the pandemic, March, April, May, a 2-day delivery easily was a week or two. People do get frustrated because they are used to and they pay for that convenience. What would be the backlash?
I think people are trying to really message on their websites, expect delays. So the difference is people weren't expecting delays back then, and so they were upset that they weren't getting their orders on time. But there's a lot of proactive messaging and also email, messages once things are delayed, that people are getting notifications and things like that your order is delayed. So I think that there's mitigation tactics that these retailers are putting in place to soften that blow versus just, where's my order? I ordered it. I expected it.
What are some of the trends that you're noticing?
Just in general, I think one of the interesting things is just around social commerce. We saw that a lot on Amazon during Prime Day. They started integrating a lot of live streaming with video. We saw a rise of TikTok this year, especially as people were in lockdown, and they were, it was the only thing that brought joy was by kind of doing TikToks together. And so I think that we're seeing a lot more micro influencers and social commerce kind of coming into play to kind of discover and buy products, especially when you can't go into a store and discover them. So there's more reliance on, video that shows you what the product looks like and how it works and things like that.
I learn new things every day. Micro-fluencers. Thank you, as always, Melissa Burdick, PactView co-founder and president. And coming up, a coin-sized COVID-19 detector attached to your skin. It tracks you constantly, yes, 24/7. Could this surveillance prove effective or excessive? We hear from the founder of BioButton next. This is Bloomberg.
Sony's PlayStation 5 went on sale Thursday, and the company hopes it'll become a long-term cash cow. It's a key test for the Japanese company amid the pandemic's gaming boom, and it goes head-to-head with Microsoft's new Xbox. Both consoles have seen solid pre-order sales. The previous console sold 113 million units.
I think what we've seen during this period of time is that communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
COVID-19 cases continue to surge around the world. In the U.S., California reporting another daily record of new infections Tuesday, while New York saw the most new cases since April. One company that's working to help curb the spread of the disease, BioIntelliSense. It has a creator and a wearable sensor. It's called BioButton. It measures body temperature and other vitals to detect COVID-19 symptoms. Joining us now for more, Dr. James Small, CEO and founder of BioIntelliSense. Doctor, just break this down. How does this work?
Well, this is a medical grade wearable that we developed actually before COVID to be able to monitor patients after they leave the hospital. And one of the most important things you're concerned about after someone leaves the hospital is developing an infection. So whether it's a cancer patient or someone that's had surgery, we developed this technology for what's called remote patient monitoring. And, it was cleared by the FDA just at the end of last year. We were launching it into large hospital programs, and then along came COVID. And this is a device that was built to monitor continuously your body temperature, your respiratory rate, your heart rate. All of those things are changed during an infection. And so with that, hospitals started using this to monitor COVID patients very broadly.
I think one of the things that stood out to me is it says it's scalable and cost effective. How scalable and how cost effective?
Well, when you look at the cost of keeping somebody in the hospital to monitor them, you're talking about $2,000 a night. And now you can send somebody home with a sticker a day or two earlier and just keep monitoring. And what we've seen is, obviously, we're doing this via a virtual interview. Virtual care for taking care of patients has also exploded over the past 8 months. And so being able to monitor somebody without having to have them hospitalized has changed everything. But you need to be able to have some kind of technology. And we're used to wearables in our daily lives for the past decade with Fitbits and Apple Watches. But those aren't medical grade devices. And so doctors and hospitals need something that's going to measure those vital signs as accurately as what we have in the hospital.
But does it track you where you go? And has anyone expressed concern about that?
So these devices do not do what we call location tracking, and we understand and appreciate those concerns. So for that very reason, this is monitoring your vital signs. It's transmitting that data via Bluetooth, just like we're used to, again, with our consumer wearables. But in this case, it's a little sticker that's on your chest, where it's more reliable to measure your body temperature and your respiratory rate and your heart rate. And when we go to a restaurant, they're doing their best to try to assess whether or not you might be sick. But the problem is that's a single snapshot of your temperature. And what this is actually doing is it's quietly monitoring your temperature 1,440 times per day. In other words, every minute. And then also your heart rate and your respiratory rate and other things that actually make it quite reliable to identify if someone is starting to develop an infection. And as you can imagine, we have a lot of people getting COVID tests just to be able to go to work, or the Screen Actors Guild every other day, football players and so forth. And unfortunately, and you've done this well in the lay press, explained the fact that a negative COVID test yesterday doesn't tell you whether or not this person might have COVID today.
Right. That is a very good point, and one that I face is we take weekly tests to come into the office, but it's just a snapshot, right, of that one moment. I am curious.
Now we have a 4K movie of someone every day. So our technology actually does a look back over the last 24 hours and says, is there anything about their vital signs that might be a concern for a new infection? So it's almost like a daily COVID test.
What if I'm asymptomatic?
Well, isn't that interesting? It turns out that asymptomatic is a bit of a unicorn. What you're finding is that asymptomatic is being reported as high as 80% of COVID patients are asymptomatic, all the way down to less than 10%. And what that tells you is two things. One is the definition of asymptomatic is all over the map. Asymptomatic could mean that this person just never had a fever greater than 38 centigrade or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Or it could mean, I don't think I had any symptoms, so it's kind of subjective. The reality is, it is very difficult to have an infectious process without your body responding to it in some fashion. So this comes down to, what is the resolution of your instrument for measuring symptomatology? In other words, if you're just taking one temperature per day, you're probably not going to see it. But if you're taking 1,440 temperatures per day, you're actually having what are called micro fevers, and you're just not aware of it. So it really is, we've got kind of the Hubble telescope to be able to see things that you just wouldn't see in somebody that's not wearing one of our bio buttons.
Fascinating. I mean, Dr. James Malt, great to have you, founder and CEO of BioIntelliSense. A very interesting conversation. And as President-elect Joe Biden begins his formal transition, many sectors, including, the cannabis industry, now prepare for potential regulations under that new administration. We have an exclusive interview earlier. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde and I spoke with Miguel Martin, CEO of Aurora Cannabis, to get perspective on the road ahead for the company.
Aurora is a global player and one of the largest, medical cannabis companies in the world. As the U.S. regulatory framework starts to evolve, Aurora's in a really good place. Today we announced a large-scale medical deal, with Israel, and so the capabilities and compliance, everything from manufacturing to production to labeling to sales and marketing that we've had to do to be successful as the largest medical provider of cannabis in Canada and in key markets around the world really bodes well for the U.S. And while it's hard to predict exactly what a federal framework looks like, we were very pleased to see that 4 states, including New Jersey, passed comprehensive cannabis legislation. And so there's definitely movement afoot, and companies like Aurora will be well positioned when it happens.
It's interesting. We spoke with one of your peers a few weeks ago, and he said his biggest competition is the black market. Do you agree, and how do you compete with the black market?
Yeah, I think that's right in Canada, but the fact of the matter is the rec market is growing. We've seen month over month considerable sales increases. We're seeing a lot more retail stores opening up across the provinces in Canada. And so while the illicit market, as we so deem it in Canada, is probably our largest competitor, the movement's afoot, and the consumers are finding that in those new categories such as vapor and pre-rolls and ingestibles and concentrates, the legal market, or our market, has a lot of advantages over the illicit market. So it's moving in the right direction, and we're bullish on the opportunities for ourselves.
Talk to us about that bullishness, because analysts aren't always kind, and that you got 1 buy, 13 holds, 4 sells. And Stifel, for example, was saying, we do not believe the company has demonstrated an enduring right to win for new market opportunities. How can you tell them, no, we've got the right to win and we're winning?
Well, listen, our business and our industry is in massive transition. If you look at where everyone was a year and a half ago and how we built up this industry and how the money was coming forward, there just was a different approach to it. I come from over 25 years of regulated CPG background, spending most of my career at Altria, but also in the CBD business, the electronic cigarette business. Now that these companies are being run by professional managers with a CPG background, we can take advantage of the core economic dynamics we have. Margins are very strong. The category is growing. We see a global evolution, as you mentioned, in the U.S. And so I don't think there's any reason, over the next 6 to 12 months, that you're going to see companies like Aurora not only be working towards EBITDA positive, but also be free cash flow positive.
It's interesting. You conducted a share sale as well, $125 million. How do you use that money?
Well, as we looked at the capital raise, we felt we were opportunistic. Right now, we don't really need that, cash for CapEx. But what we saw as investors and analysts were looking at our industry, they wanted to see not only execution, but also a runway from a cash standpoint. So we thought it was the right thing to do. We're now focused on the execution that we have, growing market share, particularly amongst our premium brands. We're really blessed to have brands like Whistler on the super premium side, Aurora and San Raf. And so we think the combination of our market execution, our global expansion, as well as the cash on the balance sheet makes us a compelling investment.
There has been a lot of talk about market share, and you have talked a lot about the premium side that many people do like the sound of going in on that and not just the flower industry. Talk to us a bit about M&A as to whether that's a way of gaining and keeping market share, because in the past you've had to have some goodwill impairments on previous deals. Do you see it all about organic or inorganic?
Yeah, I don't think we need in the Canadian market. If you look at our 4 pieces of business, we're number 1 in medical. I don't see M&A being an opportunity or a need for us in the Canadian market or internationally. When we look at the U.S. CBD business with the acquisition of Reliva, the number 1 Nielsen ranked company, don't feel like we have to do anything there. When we look at other parts of the rec international business, nothing there. And for the Canadian business, we have made significant investments. And you talked about goodwill impairment and right-sizing the company, whether it's production, sales and marketing, branding. We feel like we have everything we need.
That was Miguel Martin, CEO of Aurora Cannabis. And still ahead, looking for something to watch over the holiday? I am. Netflix's latest limited series, well, it's also its most popular. We take a look at the 1960s chess drama, why it's stealing the limelight. All of that next. This is Bloomberg.
Generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
I'm David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
Netflix scored big with that debut of their latest limited series, The Queen's Gambit. The show has gone on to be the streaming service most popular scripted limited series ever. It's attracting 62 million households. That's according to the company's figures. Peter Friedlander, Netflix VP of the original series, says, quote, "I don't think any of us could have predicted that The Queen's Gambit and the extraordinary Anya Taylor-Joy would become the global phenomenon they are today, or our biggest limited scripted series ever." Joining us for more is our media and entertainment reporter, Lucas Shaw in LA. Lucas, I admit I haven't had time quite yet to dive into it, but what makes it so popular?
Well, it has a great performance and just a great narrative. It's based on a book that found that just told this very compelling story of kind of a young chess master who learns how to play from her janitor at this orphanage that she is being raised in, and from an early age is able to challenge the best players, which was unusual not just for her age but also for her gender, because there were not a lot of prominent female chess players at the time. And it speaks to kind of Netflix's continued ability to sort of take stories and blow them up globally. Netflix in that post that you referenced talked about it being, I think, one of the top 10 shows in more than like 60 different countries. It was the #1 show in countries on almost every continent. And it really came at a crucial time for the service, because it's actually been a little while since they had a huge scripted hit. They've had big movies, big unscripted shows, but not a lot of kind of that bread and butter scripted shows that they started with House of Cards and many more.
And I love that you brought that up, Lucas, because I remember in the Disney earnings, the Disney Plus numbers continue to blow it out of the water. And Netflix has sort of responded and raising prices every 18 months or so and making sure that they're keeping the revenue and the profitability up. But of course, so reliant on these sort of big hits, but the costs, of course, that go into that. Does this sort of cement again their dominance, their lead, and of course that ever reliance on some of those big scripted shows?
Yeah, it's interesting. Netflix and Disney are playing such a different game right now. Disney is growing at that clip almost exclusively just on they're trading on that Disney brand. They have one show. They have the Mandalorian. They have the Hamilton movie, which was big, but from a scripted series show, they have the Mandalorian, and that's about it. But it well overperformed when Disney Plus launched, and obviously I'd imagine the numbers for the second season, based on some of the third-party data I've seen, are quite good. Disney will eventually scale up, but they're not playing at the same level at Netflix in terms of the volume of new shows that they're releasing. So far, it seems that they don't need to. They may need to at some point if they want to keep people and retain them. But the strength that Netflix has always had on everybody else, or the advantage, is that they're producing at such a volume and there's so much to watch that even if you're not watching Netflix right now, you're not going to think about canceling it, because you know that there's always something there for you.
Lucas, we just have about 30 seconds left. I'm curious if Netflix benefits from the fact that movies are sort of going direct to consumer. We're bypassing the theaters more and more frequently.
It's been a huge benefit, and they have a number of big titles coming up just between now and the end of the year, what is typically the kind of the Oscar season and family season. And this year seems like Netflix's best shot at winning a Best Picture Oscar. Look out for Mank, which is David Fincher's new movie, which comes out in about a week and a half.
10 seconds. What are you baking for Thanksgiving?
Pecan pie.
Love it.
Family
Lucas
tradition.
Shaw, Bloomberg News, entertainment and media reporter, and excellent baker, I hear. Here's the good news, as it does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology, but make sure to stay with us, because Bloomberg Daybreak Asia is still ahead. Happy Thanksgiving. This is Bloomberg.
it goes into this plant, it's heated up very quickly to 600 or so degrees. It basically carbonizes it, turns it into a carbon-rich material. Obviously kills all of the pathogens.
Particularly, sort of the technology landscape, have gotten to some pretty extraordinary levels. So I think it's not a surprise. I don't think it's any indication of the beginning of the end, but I do think markets don't like uncertainty.
Give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said, fine. I didn't negotiate with him. I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? Many of the world's largest pharmaceutical and vaccine manufacturers are racing to find a cure for COVID-19. One of those companies is GlaxoSmithKline, based in England, and also now the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world. Its CEO is Emma Walmsley. She was trained in classics at Oxford, but now has an incredible task, producing a vaccine that will help cure COVID-19. So how many times a day do people ask you when your vaccine is going to be available?
Yes, well, that's definitely a very regular question, whether it's from employees, customers, governments, media, or my mother. So very frequently. And obviously, we've all been delighted to see the very recent news of some of the first results that's coming through on vaccines. Yesterday, I was just on a call last night with 10 of the global pharma CEOs who are all very heavily involved in bringing solutions to COVID. And we're really excited and optimistic to see some of the first data coming through and looking forward to seeing a lot more in the next 6 months or so. We have 3 vaccines in the clinic and 2 therapeutic treatments. Everyone is understandably very impatient because I think the IMF said it's every month we wipe off the pandemic is 500 billion of value for the world. But I think right now we can be increasingly optimistic that science will win and our industry that's mobilized so fast will start to bring some scale solutions. And we're going to need more than one, that's for sure.
Now, normally to have a vaccine, it takes 4 to 7 years. The polio vaccine was 7 years. I think mumps and Ebola was 4 years. So this is being done in basically a year or so. So is it because you have so many people working on it that you're able to do it so quickly? Or is it less complicated than people originally thought?
Well, it certainly remains a very complicated effort, but when you're facing into a global crisis of this scale and this impact, there are many reasons that we have been able, as an industry, to mobilize behind getting to some faster solutions. But the ways you get to go faster are an incredible mobilization and partnership with regulators and governments. The fact that we have all been parallel pathing work that you might normally do sequentially, and that has been through putting capital at risk. But we've always, and that's why many of us signed a commitment around the quality of the work, the scale of the trials, and the commitment to safety. And wherever the pressure might have understandably come from to go faster, we're all very committed to make sure that trust in vaccination is maintained, because the world will pay a very big price, not just for COVID, but beyond that, if we break trust in the quality of vaccination. And it has, frankly, been the biggest contribution to human health since clean water, and we need to make sure that that's maintained for the future.
So some people are not willing to take a vaccination. Some people have said in surveys in the United States, only 25% or less of people say they want to take this vaccine because they think it's either been politicized and not sure it's safe, or some people just don't like vaccines anyway. Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
Well, yes, of course. I do think, and we remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy, but we also have to be incredibly respectful about why people have these questions. You know, have we been able to move fast? Have the companies put in the right kind of processes and scales of trials? What transparency are we going to bring to these processes? And why do you hear about things being stopped and started again? What does all of this mean? So I think our job is to make the commitments we have, and we have very publicly about that alongside other manufacturers, but also make sure we share data transparently and partner with governments who ultimately are those that guide in different countries around policies and distributions to reassure people. And again, because, you know, we don't worry about our children dying of measles anymore. There are smallpox has been eradicated, polio nearly so, and this is because of this incredible contribution to protecting people, and protecting life is always better than intervening at a later stage.
Now, you have teamed up for the coronavirus vaccine with Sanofi, which is another large pharmaceutical company. I'm just curious, why did you team up with someone else? You're the biggest manufacturer of vaccines. Could you not have done this yourself?
Well, I think it's one of the great things that we've all seen in many industries through this pandemic is this incredible collaboration against a common competitor or enemy. And when we announced our approaches to vaccines development in the beginning of February, we said our best chance of contributing GSK science, technology, and know-how was to offer our adjuvant technology, it's called, which helps make other vaccines more effective, and an adjuvant technology that has been proven in pandemics to any credible partners. So we have 3 vaccines partnered in the clinic with others, including Sanofi, because that adjuvant technology is proven in pandemic to work on older people and is a more effective way to get to scale manufacturing, which is the other real challenge here. We need to probably provide up to 14 billion doses if we're in 2-dose vaccines to really protect the world. And so, as well as getting to a safe and effective vaccine, we need to get to scale as fast as possible. And our route to that was partnership.
Okay, there are 2 questions that people often ask as well about whether vaccines are not only going to be available, but to whom are they going to be available first? Let's suppose you come up with one. Who gets them first? Private equity professionals, do they get them first, or not first in line? And secondly, what's it going to cost?
Well, firstly, these are 2 fundamental questions. And again, right from the beginning, we said at GSK that our principles were around global access, which is why scale of manufacturing, getting to billions of doses and having multiple vaccine solutions, not just the first one off the block, matters. Some of the new technologies that are being distributed have to be distributed at minus 70 degrees, I think, which is not suitable for going into some of the developing world. So we need access, and we need responsible pricing, which is why we declared that we would not expect to profit from any COVID vaccine during the pandemic phase. We would reinvest any short-term profits in pandemic preparedness, donations to the developing world. In terms of who gets it, we are contracted to governments in the US, Europe, the UK, Canada, and others. But we also, just recently with Sanofi, committed to 200 million doses for COVAX as a starting point, which is particularly about supplying to the developing world where you have many vulnerable populations. The first principle should be the people who get it first are the people who need it most.
Now, you are the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world, as I understand it. Some people say that vaccines are not the most profitable part of the pharmaceutical industry because, as I understand it, with a regular drug that one might manufacture, people might take it once a week, once a month, or so forth. With vaccines, you take it once or twice and you're done. So some people say that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't really care about vaccines as much as maybe they should. Is that fair? And is it that profitable a business to be in the vaccine business?
Well, first of all, I think everyone in the world, every family, community, company, and country cares a lot more about vaccines and is looking at it a lot more now than perhaps we did 2 years ago or a year ago. We are the largest manufacturer. We have more than 30 vaccines. We ship 2 million vaccines a day. I think we vaccinate about 40% of the world's children, and it is a profitable business. But it's a business that comes with responsibility around access to.
So why do you think it is that pharmaceutical companies, and you're one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, generally the public says maybe they are making too much money and maybe your image is not as good as you would like it to be? Why do you think that's happened, and do you think there's anything the industry can do to improve its image with the public?
I think this is a really fundamental question for our industry because, I mean, you just need to look this year at how mobilized we've been, what a difference we can make, and how much for healthcare resilience globally, our contribution is required. And I'm really proud of my company, but our industry for the way we've tried to collaborate for that. But the fact remains that we're still turning up in movies as the industry that people have criticisms of. And fundamentally, you can understand why there is this, when people, not just in developing countries, but in the most powerful countries in the world, are still fighting for access to healthcare for themselves or the people they love. And there is this tension, as you say, between the human right to access to healthcare and profits in big corporates, a perceived tension. And frankly, I think the industry hasn't always historically helped itself, either because of a small number of egregious acts on pricing or not enough transparency about why we do what we how we do what we do and why it matters. And I think that what we can do about that is to do a better job of fulfilling our purpose to protect health, find new solutions to fight new diseases responsibly. So partnering with governments to help address out-of-pocket challenges, to bring more transparency and stability to how people can engage with healthcare, to champion access across the world, to be responsible always in our pricing, to bring transparency to the way we work, but also do a better job of showing why it matters to everybody that we do that profitably. Because 1 in 2 of us gets cancer. 1 in 3 of us, maybe it's 1 in 2 too. It doesn't matter how successful all the people are that you interview. We don't have treatments for dementia and Alzheimer's, and we need to keep fighting and investing to be able to solve these problems for the future.
So is it cheaper and easier for a company like GSK to go buy somebody that has already made a product and put it into your system rather than try to develop it yourself? Because I realize that it takes 10 years or more to develop a product. So is it easier sometimes and better to go buy something? And how do you see the trade-offs between the two?
What we're all working hard to do is get to a better quality pipeline. And it would be incredibly arrogant to think, you know, all the world's best scientists sit inside your company, which is why business development and M&A is so common in our industry. The other thing to remember is that because of the patent cliff model in pharma, you are having to and it's another reason why, as well as delivering on our purpose responsibly, we have to do it profitably. You are having to reinvent your portfolio, you know, on a rolling decade basis, because we invest in the innovation, we build that drug, and then rightly it comes off patent, can be genericized, and the sales are lost, you know, very aggressively and quickly.
Now, you're a member of the Microsoft board, so I assume you have a fair degree of background now in technology and IT and other things like that. How have you been able to apply that to what you're doing at GSK?
Well, I would never describe myself as having a background in technology and IT, and I'm absolutely sure that was not why I was brought onto the Microsoft board. But it's an extraordinary company doing extraordinary things in an incredibly responsible way at a time when technology is changing the world, and industries, and I believe can be an incredible force for good. You know, it'll be interesting to see what we look back on the 2020s as standing for and meaning and what evolved. No doubt 2020, loads of people will be writing books about how to lead through a COVID crisis. But I think most of us believe that there will be other, you know, huge global issues that we'll have to address, like climate change and inclusive economic recovery, etc. But I also believe health resilience will be on the agenda. And the advances that the world has seen in biology, all of the genetics and genomics data that's coming through, at the same time as the advances the world has seen in AI and machine learning, combined together, have a real shot over the next decade to improve the productivity of R&D and science in my industry incredibly. You know, it is really hard to discover new drugs and vaccines. 90% of them fail. It takes a long time. Obviously, the world is mobilized right now to get to faster solutions. And I hope we learn lessons in our way we partner with regulators and use new technologies to permanently accelerate some of these processes. But the opportunity to use technology to identify and the enormous amounts of data to identify better quality targets, so we have a biological target, so we have a higher probability of success of developing better medicines faster for these enormous unmet needs in the world, I think will be defining for the next decade.
When you were in Oxford, did you say you wanted to do what you're now doing, or what was your career ambition?
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that I spent most of my time in my master's looking at Latin poetry, which was not an obvious path towards this destiny so far.
isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market, it's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
When you grew up, you went to Oxford and you majored in modern languages and classics. And as a general rule of thumb, most people running pharmaceutical companies are not majors in classics or Romance languages. So when you were in Oxford, did you say you wanted to do what you're now doing, or what was your career ambition?
Yeah, I think it would be fair to say that I spent most of my time in my master's looking at Latin poetry, which was not an obvious path towards this destiny so far. And honestly, I am probably the person you've interviewed who had the least strategic career plan ever. My entire work experience, up until I left all studies, was waitressing. I never had, any kind of internship or anything like that. I went into consultancy for a few years because I needed to pay off my debts. And then, because I spoke French, I was in charge of benchmarking L'Oreal. And I just got super curious about that industry, and then took a pay cut to go and be the assistant product manager on a home hair color. And then spent 17 years going all around the world, just tremendous opportunities, living and working in Paris, in New York for 5 years, then in China, and never thought I'd leave. And then had one of those kind of accidental meetings at the time in Shanghai with the then CEO of GSK, who explained and convinced me that I should move into the consumer business at GSK. I couldn't resist the chance to pursue, I thought, of a business with an incredibly important and impactful purpose, which is health, and also have the chance to run a global division. I had no idea that would then lead to this, but it's been exciting so far.
So what did your family say when you said, I'm going to be in the pharmaceutical or healthcare business?
Well, my family, because I have 4 children and we were living in Shanghai in China, and I said, guess what, I've got a new idea. We're not completely thrilled at the prospects at the time, but they, and then, obviously, I grew up, my father was in the Navy his whole career. I grew up in a military family where there was a tremendous sense of work ethic and duty and responsibility, and I think they were incredibly proud when we eventually came back to the UK after being out for 10 years, and excited to see the work that we've been doing since.
So you're a consumer healthcare specialist in addition to being a classics person and a modern language person, but then you, in effect, sold off, or you've joint ventured your consumer healthcare business. Did you ever expect when you came to GSK that you would actually not be doing consumer healthcare and you'd be doing the traditional pharmaceutical healthcare?
Well, the short answer to that is no, but I'm incredibly excited to see, frankly, the creation of 2 world-leading businesses. And in consumer health, we built the joint venture with Pfizer and declared at the time of doing that deal that we would by around mid-22, separate that company out to be an independent company, because it's the only standalone, dedicated to consumer healthcare, consumer products company in the world. It's got leading positions in leading markets, in leading categories, and frankly, having it inside as a slightly invisible division, a much bigger company whose number one priority is to invest in the biopharma pipeline, in innovation, around the science of immunology and genetics, and really prioritize that. We decided that the right thing to do was to create shareholder value, reset the capital structure for both companies, and free them both to have long-term, sustainable, appealing growth and returns.
So when you are in the pharmaceutical industry, like many other large industries, they are not run as much by women as maybe they should be. So do you get asked every day, what's it feel like to be a woman running a major pharmaceutical company? I'm not sure there's any other women running major pharmaceutical companies right now. And how tired do you get of that question?
Well, I think probably like many of the women leaders that you meet, I try not to define my work by my gender, but I recognize the responsibility I have, just visibly and for others, to show what's possible. I've spent pretty much all of my career being a minority in the room, mainly for my gender. I do believe that the question of diversity and inclusion that, let's face it, we have all rightly woken up to in a very humbling and shocking way, particularly on the question of race and ethnicity this year, is something that all responsible companies need to take really seriously, because the data just shows that more diverse leadership delivers better results.
If a young woman is watching now and she's saying, I want to be Emma Walmsley, I want to be the CEO of a major company, and I want to overcome all the prejudices and so forth, what would you say to her? What are the leadership traits that you think enabled you to get to the top?
First of all, don't aspire to be Emma Walmsley. Aspire to be the most exciting version of yourself, and never think of it as some end state. It's a constantly evolving learning journey. You want, in my experience, but my experience won't be the same as whatever the best experience is for you, is what drove me was doing work that I thought mattered, that I loved, working admittedly incredibly hard, because I think I had a strong influence of that growing up, that sense of responsibility and duty. Probably a good dose of fear of failure kept me going along the way. And wanting to have some kind of impact, and then taking on loads of jobs that along the way that weren't perhaps obvious at the time, but make a lot of sense looking back. Whether they might have been moving from New York to Shanghai at a time people thought that was very odd, or taking a pay cut to go and work on hair color. But as long as you're doing things that you can be curious about and learn and keep and you love, then the success can follow.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interview, because I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him. I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? If there is one form of music that America is famous for having invented, it's jazz. Invented in the early part of the 20th century in New Orleans, jazz has now become synonymous with American music, not just in the United States, but around the world. And America has produced incredible jazz legends like Duke Ellington and Count Basie, Dizzy Gillespie, Louis Armstrong. But today, at the top of the jazz world is Wynton Marsalis, the founder and director of Jazz at Lincoln Center. He's a performer, he's an educator, he's a composer, and he lives jazz 24 hours a day. So do you get tired of people calling you a jazz legend? Do you feel older when they say that to you?
Yeah, I like the word jazz. I don't like the legend.
Let's talk about your family for a moment. Sadly, your father passed away in April at the age of 85 because of COVID. So it must have been a very sad loss because you were very close to him, of course.
Yeah, for all of us. For me and my brothers, of course, as he's our father. We loved him so much. He was such an example for us, and he's such a kind man and a man with a large worldview and also a large person. He didn't do small things. He was very philosophical. He wasn't a touchy-feely type of person. He's from that generation too. It wasn't a lot of hugging and I love yous going on, but there was underneath a lot of resolve and seriousness and just kind of deep love, not just for us, but also he had many students who love him and love to tell stories about him, and he supported a lot of us.
So for those who may not be familiar, your father was a very, very prominent jazz pianist. When you were growing up, did you obviously look up to your father? Was he somebody who said, I want you to be a trumpet player, I want you to be a jazz trumpet player, or did he not push you into that?
No, he didn't push any of us into anything. You know, I always hung out with him. My father really struggled when I was growing up. He was trying to play modern jazz in an era of segregation and in clubs and with a populace that didn't like that style of music. So much of my experience was going to sparsely populated clubs with him and in colorful areas. So I loved to go because I was always the only kid in the room. And it started when I was 3, 4, 5 years old, and it continued till I got into high school and started to work myself. But I always went with him and identified with his struggle, really, because he continued to play, even though he didn't get audience support. He was not well known. He wasn't famous. He struggled financially. He never complained, and he was very high-minded in his belief in jazz and in his belief in the necessity of it as a tool for healing people and raising consciousness and things like that.
So when you were growing up, you obviously experienced racial discrimination because it was a segregated area then, is that right?
Yeah, that defined the entire segregation, discrimination, racism. That was just a part of life. Like it's not something you could, this is not philosophy I'm talking now. It's just how it was. Your neighborhood looked a certain way, the white neighborhoods were a certain way. Black people generally lived in our area on one side of the railroad tracks. We still had ditches in our streets. And any type of systems always worked against you. And you had to, it was what the system was. You didn't have distance from it. So you didn't have, it's easy to look back on a thing and experience it, not the way you experienced it when you grew in it. When you grew in it, it was very much a fact of life. So I happen to be someone who never liked it. So I fought with it a lot and had a lot of problems in that system, but most people adapted to it and were okay with it. They didn't like it, but they would sometimes you're in a bad situation. In this case, we talk about racism. It could be anything. It could be a health situation.
Right.
The degree to which you're willing to fight against it really is based on your ability to accept the pain of fighting against it.
So are you surprised about the Black Lives Matter situation? Here we are in the year 2020, well advanced past the time that you grew up, and we still have racial problems of that type.
Yeah, we're not anywhere near advanced past what I grew up with. So no, I'm not surprised by it. I had the honor to go into so many American schools throughout the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. It probably well over 1,000 schools. So we have a segregation in our systems in general. So no, it doesn't. None of it is surprising to me.
So today, as a famous jazz musician, you're recognized all over the country and many places around the world. Do you feel you are still suffering from racial discrimination? Do you still feel, even despite your exalted status in the music world, you are really not treated the same as you would be if you were white?
Yes, I feel that. I feel it in terms of the kind of intellectual patronization that I receive, the low level of criticism of our music. I'm subject to things, of course, nothing like what I grew up with, nor do I make a habit of complaining about it constantly, because I'm also treated in a way with so much respect by so many people that for me to complain would be past gratuitous. So if you ask me the question directly, yes, I would say I've been treated unfairly by newspapers. Something like the New York Times, the way our institution, Jazz at Lincoln Center, has been covered is abominable. Even though we get articles, the quality of those articles are always very poorly researched. The writers, oftentimes down through the history, lack the intelligence and depth of engagement with the form to be qualified to speak on it in a paper of record. But because it's jazz, it doesn't matter. So that's only in direct response to your question, because I don't want to I don't want to confuse it with when I was growing up or the situations that I found myself in, or my father's situation or grandfather's, or let's go back in the generations. So I'm not doing that. And I'm very, very grateful for how I've been treated by people all over this country of all kinds.
So there's a story that when you were 10, your father had you sit down with, I think, Al Hurt, and maybe it was Miles Davis, and they said, how would you like to play the trumpet? And they gave you a trumpet to play. Is there anything true to that?
No, when I was 6, my father was playing with Al Hurt, and Al Hurt gave me a trumpet for my 6th birthday. So that's true. And my father later was talking to Miles Davis and said, I'm getting my son a trumpet. Before Al got me a trumpet, my father was talking to Miles. He was standing with Al, and Miles said, don't get that boy a trumpet, it's too hard. So that is a true story.
Okay, so as you grew up, you were actually, as I understand it, a classical musician more than a jazz musician. And when you went to Juilliard, where you went to college, you were interested in classical music. Is that true?
No, I grew up always wanting to play jazz, but jazz is always much more difficult to learn in that time, especially than classical music. Because my father was a jazz musician, I was always around the music. I was raised in the culture. I love the musicians. Now, my father was a modern jazz musician. He wasn't playing New Orleans jazz, but at a certain time when I was maybe 10 or 11, he started to play New Orleans music, and I also played in Danny Barker's Fairview Baptist Church Band, which was a New Orleans traditional band. Jazz, it was difficult at that time for a person my age and my generation to figure out what it was, because it was not a part of the American mythology. Whereas with classical music, you had competitions and classes you could go to, so you could get a track record on your resume. Like if you see what did I do, it will say when I was 14, I won a competition to play the Haydn Trumpet Concerto with the New Orleans Philharmonic. But I was playing jazz the whole time. But what could I say that I did? I played in a club called Tyler's Beer Gardens on a Wednesday.
But one year you won a Grammy, the only person ever to win a Grammy in jazz and in classical music in the same year.
There's a funny story about my father. He went to the Grammys. He was not into those kind of things. And he sat through the whole show and he was like, wow, this is the Grammys. So at the end of the show, I won. I was in the back in the hotel with him and my mother. I was like, getting ready to go out to the party or something. And I was like, yeah, man, my daddy looked at me and he was wondering. He said, man, I'm glad that was the Grammys, huh? He said, yeah, well, I'm glad you won. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's great that you won. But you don't think this means you can play, do you? So I started laughing because I was like 22. And I knew what he was saying because I still, of course, had a long way to go to learn how to play.
What did people say initially when you said we need to do more jazz at Lincoln Center?
Maybe the initial founders, Rockefeller, they didn't like the music. It doesn't matter. The Constitution was not written with the rights of Afro-Americans and Native Americans in mind. But the Constitution can be amended, and it has been amended.
Argue classical music came from Europe, and you can argue that other parts of music came from other parts of the world, but jazz was invented in the United States, and it's a classic American kind of invention, I would say. But why is it so hard for some people to understand that? You've written a book about it, and you make it in your book sound like it's almost a religious experience to play jazz and to understand jazz. It's important to be an individual who can play well, but also to play with a team. Can you explain why jazz is almost like a religion to people who care about jazz?
Well, jazz is our national art form. And as such, it objectifies a lot of our basic principles. And if a group of people are blessed to have an art form, which you can have a civilization and a society, you may never create an art form that does that. It's a blessing. So America was blessed with a group of musicians and a social condition that produced this music. The music has three fundamental elements. The first is improvisation, which is our kind of individuality and what we believe in. We have rights and freedoms and things that are about the individual. Then swing, which is about nurturing common ground, finding balance with other people, working out an agenda as you go along under the pressure of time. And then the blues, and the blues is an optimism that's not naive. So the blues also implies an acuity. That's a democratic thing. Now, suffice to say that everything in the music ties into things that we do down to the three branches of government, like the rhythm section are. To amend the Constitution is like adding to an arrangement. I could go on. And after a while of giving you these examples, you'll realize these are not superficial things that are contrived, that they actually come out of the American way of life. Now, to kind of give you, it's going to be a little longer answer, but it's important because the central question of jazz's position in our country concerns the relationship of slavery to the American identity and our mythology as a country. Black Americans, by and large in our country, have little or no knowledge of jazz. And jazz is the greatest achievement of the Afro-American culture in the context of the American culture, meaning it's Afro-American, but it applies to all Americans, as many things in American culture apply to all Americans. Our poor public education system makes sure that a certain group remains ignorant. And the average white jazz writer is actually a rock fan who's for a long time wished that jazz would actually be something else without Black folks at the core of it, or that maybe jazz would just die away. That's why if you study jazz, there's a long-standing tradition of article after article and decade after decade saying, is jazz dead? That's probably one of the most questions that's been asked since the 1930s. Now, all of this investment and the destruction of jazz is to further obscure a big lie that jazz uncovers. And it's important to look at this because it's a serious thing to consider if we're to transform our nation. If we say our nation is based on human freedom, and we're the first on earth founded on the glorious celebration of human freedom, dignity, and rights, how do we then reconcile and correct the systemic dehumanizing ownership and brutalizing a large underclass of people for free labor because of their skin color. It's too much injustice to correct. So we're forced to say that those people are responsible for the problem. They're less than human, and it's just their condition. But if they aren't, if it's not their condition, it means that our mythology and belief about ourselves is not true. Now, is Elvis gonna not be the king? Man, where you gonna put jazz if Elvis is the king?
So let me ask you, if I were to go to listen to a Tchaikovsky concert or a Beethoven concert, it's going to be mostly sounding the same no matter where I'm going to listen to it, no matter what orchestra. They basically might play slightly better, slightly different, but basically you know what you're going to get when you sit down. With jazz, am I wrong in that a jazz musician can kind of expand on what has been composed and kind of play it differently every different time? Is that part of what jazz is all about?
That's the improvisation part. That one part allows you have a lot of latitude to do things. That's like the way Americans conduct business, all the innovations we have, the freedom we have to speak, the fact that we think we can step into a space and use our personality to transform a tradition. Yes, we have that freedom. But balancing that freedom is we have the responsibility to extend a courtesy and an understanding to other people who have those freedoms and nurture that common space. That's the part of jazz we struggle with.
So in your book on jazz, you talk about some of the greats who either played with or who influenced you. And I'd just like to ask your brief comments on some of them. First is Louis Armstrong. You originally thought he was, as you say, an Uncle Tom, but you obviously changed your view, I guess.
Yeah, because it's hard for later generations to understand the challenges of an earlier generation and norms and things of show business and what Louis Armstrong did. It doesn't mean that necessarily, even with I understand more of his genius and who he was and what he played, but it still doesn't mean that when I look at the movies he made or the positions he went, I still don't necessarily like that. I don't like a lot of where Black people are in any of the American movies of the 1930s and 40s and 50s. And as a matter of fact, some of it now, a lot of it now, that has that same type of destructive mythology. If you consider the fact that when I was a teenager, the heroic figure for Black youth in movies were pimps. I mean, what is it for a pimp to be a hero, be at the top of your mythology? So, but to not get sidetracked with that, yeah, I thought that. But later I learned and understood who Louis Armstrong was as a musician. That's a totally different story. That man was a genius of such magnitude, you could lie about how great he was and you still wouldn't be saying enough.
So you're a composer as well as a performer, educator, conductor, and so forth. One of the great composers in the jazz world was Duke Ellington. Did he have any influence on you?
Great. I love Duke. And Duke's intelligence, his dedication, over 2,000 pieces. And I love him. And because I grew up also listening to classical music, I love Beethoven.
What about Dizzy Gillespie? Was he an influence on you?
The thing about Dizzy Gillespie, it hit me first, was the depth of his intelligence. I met him when I was 14. And just when he started talking, the way my daddy and other musicians listened to him, Dizzy was very intelligent. He's part of the reason that we developed jazz at Lincoln Center, because I didn't want to play in a big band because I had always grown up playing small band music. And Dizzy told me, I called him and asked him, man, what do you think I should do? He said, to lose one's orchestral heritage should not be considered an achievement. So he was telling me, because you need to figure out how to keep our orchestral heritage. We paid a lot of dues to build up orchestral music in jazz, and for us to just give it away and say the big band is old-fashioned, that's not intelligent.
Let's talk a bit about jazz at Lincoln Center. So you began playing jazz at Lincoln Center when, in the late 1980s?
Yeah, 1987.
That evolved into Jazz at Lincoln Center, which is, you're now the artistic director and music director of the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. Is that right?
We wanted to fill a space in the American arts and provide enough education and music and advocacy, enough concerts for us as a nation to have our native art form when it came time for us to address our mythology and correct it so that we could move forward as a nation. So we've succeeded beyond any of our wildest imagination with the volume of concerts we've been able to do. We built 3 concert halls in the middle of Manhattan on 59th Street, the House of Swing. We have put on concert series over 30 years. We have 12 education programs. And even since this pandemic, I mean, we've put out over 500, 600 pieces virtually. You know, we're deeply engaged.
So when you started Lincoln Center, when Lincoln Center opened in the 1960s, people thought, okay, this is opera, symphonic music, classical kind of music. You came along and said, maybe we can have jazz. What did people say initially when you said we need to do more jazz at Lincoln Center?
We had a lot of support from the top of the organization. Everybody was dedicated. And, you know, when it was founded, maybe Lincoln Center didn't think about the music, or maybe the initial founders, Rockefeller, they didn't like the music. It doesn't matter. The Constitution was not written with the rights of Afro-Americans and Native Americans in mind, but the Constitution can be amended, and it has been amended.
How do you divide your time between playing, conducting, composing, and teaching?
I work all the time, so I don't separate anything. My work is also my hobby.
Explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
We have some good news in terms of vaccines and a chance to overcome the health crisis, but we are not there yet.
We need the fiscal stimulus, and we need it relatively quickly, because I can see where the second wave's coming. You can see consumer spending beginning to get impacted again.
What we need surveillance to be stronger. We need public health measures, because you have no other way at the beginning. This is your best weapon, and you need to use it well.
The good news is that both the vaccines and the therapeutics, in particular the antibodies, are coming along and will start to bring that number way down.
We don't just need more investment in public health. We must also rethink how we value health.
I do believe a targeted fiscal stimulus is going to be in order to really begin a more equalized economy.
Let me ask you, on a normal time before COVID came, and hopefully when COVID's gone, you'll return to the situation you had before. Are you on the road half the time and half the time in New York? Or how do you divide your time? And how do you divide your time between playing, conducting, composing, and teaching?
Well, I do many things. I'm also the managing director of our organization. So I deal with everything in our staff. Our executive director, Greg Scholl, and our management team. They're all fantastic. Colleagues, if anything, I mean, I work all the time, so I don't separate anything. My work is also my hobby, and this pandemic I always respected all of my colleagues, but I'm going to tell you that the pandemic has given me such a greater appreciation of the quality of people I've been blessed to work with. Our orchestra, we still have a vast majority of our staff on. We're open for business. We're getting things done. The orchestra is so supportive of the mission of the organization. We have 11 arrangers in our orchestra. That's something that has never happened. Composers, teachers, the phone calls I get. Then when you get to our staff and our managers of every division of our building, our financial, our CFO, I can go position to position. People's dedication will bring me to tears. And that's why, you know, we're struggling like all the arts organizations are, because we've lost the ability to earn revenue. But we are so for real about our mission and achieving it, even under this type of duress. I think it's really the greatest blessing I've had in my life has been to work with this high quality people for this amount of time. So I'm so grateful for that opportunity. I don't even consider it to be work.
When you go overseas, is jazz popular outside the United States?
Jazz has never really been popular. So no, it's not popular like funk was popular, like rock and roll is popular. It's not popular. Jazz is meaningful and is necessary. So those who are interested in that like jazz. Those who are not, they don't like jazz. There's a lot of other things to like. We need to teach our kids about the music. It is a national art form. And I always make the point, people say, what's going to be new in jazz? I say, people are going to listen to it. That's what's the new thing.
Let's suppose somebody says, I've never been exposed to jazz very much. I've just listened to Wynton Marsalis. I'm persuaded he knows what he's talking about. So I'm going to listen to jazz. What is it that you would tell people about why the jazz experience as a listener is so compelling compared to other forms of music?
Well, because it has a development section. So you have to follow what musicians play from one point. It's like what I loved about that Beethoven symphony. It wasn't just one thing repeated over and over and again. It was a thing, and then another thing, another thing. Jazz is the music that's most in the world like conversation. Jazz is a music that prizes individuality. You have a lot of great individuals you can interface with. From Lester Young, Billie Holiday, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock. You can name musicians. You have great groups that you can love that play in different forms. And you have the whole Afro-Latin form of jazz that takes you everywhere from Brazil to Cuba to Puerto Rico. It integrates your citizenship and your understanding of the world. And most importantly, it gives you tremendous pride in being American.
I don't know about you, but
because we didn't have to denigrate or cut anybody down or do anything negative to anybody to create this. It's a non-predatory form. It's a symbiotic form. And you can be as rich as you want to be in jazz, and nobody else has to
resonated with them.
You're a teenager by my standards, so you're very, very young. But you'll continue to do this for another couple decades because this is what you love doing. Is that right?
Man, I still smell Similac on you.
Giving you a wake-up call, giving you
I don't know what you're talking about.
What you can do in order to
yeah, I'm gonna do this till I die if I can. The good Lord willing, and people will have me. I've been blessed to do something kind of this abstract and get unbelievable support from people. That's why earlier when I answered the question of racism, for somebody like me to complain, I'd have to be out of my mind.
Asking some fantastic questions. And finally, I want to thank the team for being here, for supporting, for putting on these events. They wouldn't happen unless everyone chipped in. And my final thanks to people after here is to thank you for coming. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful to be able to share with you these topics, and wonderful to see people coming into the different sessions. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your thoughts. Look forward to seeing you in 2020. Oh, and one final thing before we go. I just want to say, just remember, it's okay to not be okay. So if you are going to, do reach out and get the help that you need. All right. Thank you very much. Have a fabulous evening and look forward to seeing you in 2021.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market, it's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
Their CPG history, their experience, and really how we might be able to combine together to really create this fantastic public company. And so we kind of got into the SPAC thing a little bit before it became such a hot method of going public.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
Well, I watch your interviews, so I know how to do some interviews.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said 250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? For the last several decades, one of the most important people in international finance is actually not that well known to the public. Her name is Kristalina Georgieva. She was a senior commissioner of the European Commission. She was the chief executive of the World Bank, and now she is the managing director of the IMF. And in that position, she heads an organization whose purpose is to help countries that have financial problems. Today, because of the pandemic, there are many countries that have financial problems, and there are many people that are calling Kristalina. You've been a senior commissioner of the European Commission, and now you're the managing director of the IMF. In getting these positions, was it more difficult because you were a woman or you were from a small country called Bulgaria? Where was there more prejudice, against being a woman or from Bulgaria?
Well, ultimately, I got these jobs. So whatever the prejudice was didn't hold me back. If I am to make a call on that, I would say being from a small country always requires to work twice as hard as others to prove yourself.
When you're growing up in a small country and then behind the Soviet curtain, Iron Curtain, did you ever think that you would wind up in these kind of positions as a young girl? Did you imagine anything like this?
David, even today, there are moments when I'm pinching myself. Am I the head of the IMF, coming from where I'm coming from? So no.
So many people don't know, honestly, what the IMF and the World Bank do. So can you explain what they actually do and why they're different and why we need them?
So in the end of the Second World War, in a beautiful place in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods, enlightened leaders came together and said, we have to help the world to not get into war. And to do so, we need to help the economy to perform better. And they created these 2 sister institutions, the IMF, with a mandate on financial stability, growth, and employment, and the World Bank to invest in reconstruction of then war-torn countries.
Okay, so your job at the IMF is to take a country that, let's say, has financial problems. Their economy is weak or they've had other kind of crises, and you can help them through that difficult time by lending them money. And right now you have about $270-some billion outstanding.
Yep.
But do you actually get paid it back?
So the loans we provide are with very attractive interest rates because it is the money of our members. They extend to each other a helping hand. For the poorest members, we charge no interest. These are soft loans, much softer than the traditional IMF loans. Countries pay us back. The poorer countries have longer maturity and longer time to serve their loans to us. But what matters is not just the money. What matters is that we work with countries to make them stronger so they can repay with more ease. And that is absolutely paramount for people to know about the fund. We are there to help countries to have strong economic fundamentals.
Okay. Now, there's some people who say that sometimes when the IMF has lent money in the past, let's say to Argentina or Greece, the terms are, let's say, draconian, and there's a lot of, I would say, revulsion in those countries against the harsh IMF terms. Is that still fair, or those things are the days of the past?
Well, of course, we learn from experience, and one of the things we learned is that we have to pay very close attention to the impact of programs on people. Policies are for people. Macro decisions have micro consequences, and we are integrating this much more in the programs we do today. We think about social spending, put a floor. Don't allow education and health to be so dramatically impacted that human capital of the country is eroded.
Or let's suppose I'm the president of a country and I, would like some extra money, and can I call you up and say, I'd like to borrow some money, and how hard is it to get the money? How long does it take? And are people afraid of calling you because their own credit ratings might go down if it's known that they have to borrow money from the IMF?
If you're a president of a country in trouble, you better call, because if you do not have access to markets, and some developing countries don't, then the only way to boost your economy is to rely on the IMF, the World Bank, institutions like us. Because this is an exogenous shock, it is truly an emergency. The way we respond is different from what we do when a country isn't in trouble because it mismanaged its economy. It is the fault of those that have been governing at that time. What we are asking countries is two questions. One, please, when you get the money, prioritize your health system and helping the most vulnerable people in the most vulnerable part of the economy. Two, show me the receipts. What did you use the money for? We are advising countries to spend more, but keep the receipts. We want accountability, not just to us, but to the taxpayers in the countries. And we have advanced already financial lifelines to 75 countries in record short time. I mean, in this place, when a crisis knocks on the door, we turn on a dime. We are the world's first responder in crisis.
Now, recently, you have asked the G20 to more or less have a debt forgiveness situation so that some people that owe you money wouldn't have to pay it back. Why did you need to do that?
When we got hit by this crisis, 4 poor countries, that is devastating twice as much as it is for countries that are wealthier. Why? Because 1, they have weak health systems. 2, they have very little capacity to respond on their own. And 3, a number of them have had high debt levels by that time. So the economy is in standstill. If debt service is not put in standstills, these countries have to decide, do they pay doctors and nurses and save lives, or serve their debt? And that is bad for them, but it is also bad for the rest of the world, because a country in desperate situation falling to pieces turns into a security threat to its neighbors and the rest of the world.
So you have lots of economists here. What are the economists here telling you about the state of the economy in the world? Because of the pandemic, are we likely to have a kind of global recession for another year or so?
We have some optimism on 2 grounds. The first one is exceptionally decisive action by central banks and by finance authorities. They put a floor under the world economy. We, on our side, have done our part for the countries that have no resources on their own. The second reason we are somewhat more optimistic today than we were a couple of months ago is that we see the world learning how to function with the pandemic still with us. But make no mistake, the recovery is partial and it is uneven. We are not going to see in 2021 return to pre-COVID conditions, and we are seeing big divergence, parts of the economy doing really well and parts falling behind. And this is my biggest concern, that we may come on the other side of this crisis with more inequality, higher debt, higher deficits, and a climate crisis still hanging on us. If we are strong as a world, we ought to come together. A massive coordinated stimulus can make it so that we have a better economy on the other side than we had in 2019.
How did you wind up in the Fiji Islands?
I got the letter, the invitation to go and teach. I had to virtually go to the map and see where Fiji was.
That over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Talk about your background. As I mentioned at the outset, you grew up in Bulgaria. Bulgaria at that time was behind the Iron Curtain, so it was not a powerful country in the West, and it was actually a small and I think relatively poor country. It turns out you were from a prominent family, but not a wealthy family. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
So yes, I was a daughter of ordinary people. My father was a road engineer. My mother stayed at home to look after us. Modest means. Very happy childhood, very loving parents. Yes, my family was prominent, but I didn't know that until I was in my 20s. Why? Because my father was concerned that if we talk about the revolutionary who was my great-grandfather and the fact that we can trace back our origins 5 centuries into the past, that may not gel well with the power of the proletariat.
So when you're growing up in Bulgaria in, let's say, the 50s and 60s, were you required to learn Russian?
Of course, of course.
And English?
Yes. No, my mother was a Francophone, so she sent me to learn French. I had some French. When Gorbachev came to power, in the Soviet Union and glasnost and perestroika came to Bulgaria, I was able to apply for a scholarship in the West, and in 6 months I learned English enough to pass, to win a British Council scholarship to go to London School of Economics. That was incredible, to be on the other side of the Iron Curtain. And what I found out over there, having access to information, was that my country was broke. My country was so much deep in debt that I couldn't imagine how it is going to survive. Sure enough, 2 years later, Bulgaria, the economy collapsed and Bulgaria turned a page away from socialism to market economy.
How did you wind up in the Fiji Islands?
Now, that is a story. So when I was at London School of Economics, a professor noticed me as somebody who is quite professional. He then became the Dean of Economics in the University of South Pacific in Suva, in Fiji. He's sitting there wondering how he can find highly qualified professors that are willing to work for very little money. And so, brilliant idea. Wrote to this Bulgarian woman. I got the letter, the invitation to go and teach. I had to virtually go to the map and see where Fiji was. Getting from Bulgaria to Fiji in 1990 was an adventure. And so I'm landing in Fiji. I handed my passport to the passport control lady. She takes it, types something, looks at me and says, "Where are you from?" I said, "Bulgaria." She types again, looks at me and says, "There is no such country." The first Bulgarian to go to Fiji. Now, the professor really liked me. He offered me a job. I still remember he offered me a job, $16,000 a year. I had no idea of my market value. At that time, I was paid $100 a month, but I still didn't take the job. Why? Because it was so far from Bulgaria. So I went back. I got a chance to go to MIT, to come to the United States, and the rest is history.
But did you ever say, I'm not going back to Bulgaria, I'm now in the West, and I'm going to stay in the West?
Actually, no. I came to MIT with the idea to spend 1 year, learn as much as I can, and bring this knowledge back to Bulgaria. I actually had a contract to write a textbook on environmental economics as an outcome of this visit. But the World Bank called me up. They offered me a summer job. I came for the summer. The fourth day, I'm in this consulting job. I got a call and I got an offer to stay at the bank. Why? At that time, the bank was looking for environmental economists. 92, post-Rio, check. They were desperate for women. They were very male-dominated, so check. And they were opening up towards the Soviet Union, former Eastern Bloc, Russian speakers, check. So I took the job. I said, well, you know, this is such an opportunity to work here. And then I did incredibly interesting jobs within the bank. I raised up in the ranks.
Right.
And one day I got the call to go to Europe.
What did you actually do there? What was your job?
I had first the job of humanitarian and crisis commissioner, and it was an incredible experience. I had the front seat position in all the terrible crises that were happening at that time, from Haiti earthquake to the triple disaster in Japan to the Syrian war. And I was able to mobilize the very best of Europe to help people in terrible need and reform the crisis response system of Europe. One of my strong memories of this time, I'm in a village talking to a Syrian girl who wants to go back to school, but there is no schooling available. And I said to her, her name was Aisha, I said, Aisha, I hope you would be able to go back to school. I walked out of there and I thought, my hoping means nothing to her. My acting would make a difference.
Right.
And then we mobilized and we scaled up massively access to education for Syrian refugee children.
Have you ever thought of running for office in Bulgaria, or you're quite happy where you are?
I always take the job I have as what takes my full concentration. I pour my heart in it.
Generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
So you talked about Bretton Woods and how the IMF and the World Bank were created in the late 1940s. If you had been there then, how would you change the structure for the IMF or the World Bank? And might you think there could be some time in the future when some of the structure might be changed to make it better?
Well, they were created very thoughtfully with institutions that evolve with time. Their shareholding changes as the world economy changes. What is required from us is to relentlessly pursue this adjustment. So the IMF, in terms of its governance and the shareholding, reflects the world of today. Right. And that takes a lot of work bringing the membership together. The IMF has done a successful quarter adjustment. This is changing shareholding, and now is due to take stock again. So between now and 2023, that would be a very important job to do.
So what percentage of the people who are on the staff, are they Americans or from overseas, and what percentage are male or female and so forth?
So we have just about 75% of staff from all countries in the world, and around 25% are Americans. Logically, for many positions, we recruit locally, like for some of the assistants, coordinators. For the professional pool, we recruit internationally and competitively. Broadly speaking, we are about the same men and women, but you wouldn't be surprised. When we go up, there are more men than we have down. And this is something that I'm zeroing on. When I came, directors, this is the layer of management that has most important operational responsibility, were 25% women, 75% men. Now they are 40-60. Okay. And I would drive this pipeline of talented women, not because I am obsessed with percentages, but because diversity matters. Having different regional perspectives, having men and women working together makes us more effective. We make better decisions as a result.
Historically, the World Bank president was picked more or less by the United States administration, the president of the United States, and the head of the IMF was more or less picked by Europeans, I would say. You foresee that that will change, or that's going to continue for the foreseeable future?
I think that there would be more and more demand to make these positions open for competition based on merits. And even if you take this round, yes, I'm a European, Europe aligned to nominate me. But I'm a European from a country that in the mid-90s benefited from an IMF program. I do belong to emerging markets, and emerging markets were very loud in supporting me for that reason. So I want to see that process to continue. Why? Because institutions are much stronger when the whole world believes they belong to all of us.
Now, China has become a major economic power, I guess the second largest economy in the world. Does China have the influence in the IMF and the World Bank proportionate to its overall global economy now?
Well, they have increased their shareholding in both institutions. They have been also very active in supporting the institutions. In the case of the IMF, China, the US, the rest of the world, in this crisis, stepped up significantly support for us to be able to extend concessional lending. And I see the engagement of China as constructive. That is so very important when we are in the midst of the worst crisis we have had since the Second World War.
So the IMF stands for the International Monetary Fund. Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought of changing it to say it stands for I am fair, I am friendly? Wouldn't that be better?
I love that. Most people here in the fund say it stands for it is mostly fiscal. But I much prefer the definition you gave. And actually, this is what I would relentlessly work for. We at the fund to always think of the people whose lives are impacted by the policies we recommend.
You're the most prominent person in the West from Bulgaria, as far as I know. Maybe there's somebody else, but I can't think of anybody else. So I assume you could go back to Bulgaria whenever you wanted to and run for president of Bulgaria. Yeah, I don't know if that's a better job than the one you currently have, but have you ever thought of running for office in Bulgaria, or you're quite happy where you are?
I always take the job I have as what takes my full concentration. I pour my heart in it. I never, ever think of what next. So as long as I'm the head of the IMF, it is the IMF and the membership that has my complete dedication. We have some good news in terms of vaccines and a chance to overcome the health crisis, but we are not there yet.
We need the fiscal stimulus, and we need it relatively quickly, because I can see where the second wave's coming. You can see consumer spending beginning to get impacted again.
What we need is surveillance to be stronger. We need public health measures
because you have no other way at the beginning. This is your best weapon, and you need to use it well.
The good news is that both the vaccines and the therapeutics, in particular the antibodies, are coming along and will start to bring that number way down.
We don't just need more investment in public health. We must also rethink how we value health.
I do believe a targeted fiscal stimulus is going to be in order to really begin a more equalized economy.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviews.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? In the United States today, there are only 38 women who are serving as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. One of those with the best track record is Tricia Griffith. She is the CEO of Progressive Insurance, one of the largest automobile insurance companies in the United States. She started out as a claim adjuster and worked her way up over many years to become, in 2016, the CEO. Since that time, the stock is up more than 175%. My big mistake was I didn't know her then, and I didn't buy the stock in the company. If she ever leaves that company and goes anywhere else, I'm going to buy that stock right away. So for those who aren't familiar with Progressive, and probably if you watch television, you would be familiar because you have a lot of television ads, right? And I'm just curious, why is it that automobile insurance companies seem to advertise a lot? I see your competitors advertising, you advertise a lot. Is that because people really will be guided in their insurance decision by the advertisement?
It's just a really competitive industry, which is always odd because it's something you're required to have. So it's not like, you know, do you pick a different soft drink or a beverage? But it is required, but it is so competitive that to be out there and be top of mind and be on the short list, you really have to be advertising.
So you have a famous character in your insurance, some of your ads called Flo, a woman that plays, I guess, an insurance person. Does she get a certain percentage of all the new business she brings in because she's so good, or she doesn't have that deal?
No, she does not have that deal. She is paid per contract, and she's doing fine.
Let's talk about this year. Now, a lot of the auto insurers are up this year, in part because people aren't driving as much, and the theory is if you don't drive as much, it's hard to have an accident. So I presume there are fewer people claiming that they've had an accident, and therefore you don't have to pay out as much. Is that why your stock is up, you think?
I think that might be one piece, but I think we've also continued to grow not only market share, based on units, based on policies in force. And really, if you think about it, yes, immediately in March, vehicle miles traveled have been reduced and losses went for that. But as states have reopened, it continues to go up. And right now, we're still not pre-COVID level of driving. We're about 8 to 10% down, but those loss costs, that gap is closing in because we're seeing more and more people driving more often. And so that lasted a couple of months. And then remember, many companies gave back credits or have reduced rates.
Now, let me ask you about that. If you get a rebate, that was because you voluntarily thought it was a good idea, or the regulators said you have to give back money. Why did the automobile insurers start giving back money to their policyholders?
We did it because it was the right thing to do. I mean, we immediately saw driving vehicle miles traveled go down 40%. It went back up pretty quickly to 20, et cetera. But we sat down and said, okay, we don't want margins that big. It's not the right thing to do. We want to be competitively priced. And so we gave 20% credits for both April and May. And then subsequently, we're very analytically driven. So we went sort of state by state, channel by channel, product by product. And so far, we've had rate decreases in about 35 states. And those are baked in permanently.
So today, when people have an accident today, when they do have accidents, the accidents are more expensive than they used to be. Is that because the cars are more complicated, more expensive to repair?
Yeah, they absolutely are. A couple of reasons. One is the components of the car. So I started out as a claims rep, and the cars in 1988, the bumper repair or replacement would be a couple $100s. And now they could be upwards of $1,000, $2,000 because of the components, the safety components. In addition, think of the inflation of medical costs. So if you're injured in an accident, that's another component of the increased severity.
So let's suppose I want to get some automobile insurance. I'm now 71 years old. Am I a good risk as a 71-year-old, or would you rather have somebody who's 25 and more alert?
That is one variable. So we look at hundreds of variables. So it depends on where you live. Do you live in a congested area? Do you live in the rural area? What is your driving history? Do you have our usage-based insurance? That way we know what time of day you drive, how many miles you drive. Have you had any violations? There's so many things that go into it. So age is only one component.
When I was a teenager, I was told that teenagers are not good drivers and insurance is expensive. Is that true today? Insurance is more expensive for teenagers or not good drivers?
I will say that having 6 people that drive in my family that we've added over the years, we call them youthful drivers. The issue is that many are good, but they just don't have that maturity. They haven't had the experience. And I remember saying, because a lot of times you'll get rate increases if you add on a youthful driver. And I challenged that when I first got this job. And then I realized, having 6 youthful drivers, that there is a reason you pay a little bit more.
You are in home insurance now, and you bought a company that helps you get into that. Why do you want to be in the home insurance business?
For us, it was really access to more of the preferred customer, especially on the independent agent side. We had a relationship with ASI, American Strategic Insurance, for years. We had a small ownership in them, and their values were very much aligned with us. And so we decided to go ahead and purchase them. And it's been a really nice transition, a really great acquisition. And so now, having sort of the whole picture for whatever you want, auto, home, your boats, motorcycle, commercial. And that's why we're continuing to expand, because I think it's really important to diversify.
Is the home insurance business very profitable now?
The home insurance business, it depends on what company you're talking about. We have struggled a little bit because of wind, hail, catastrophes, and we also have been obviously growing our model across the country. We were in about 5 states for many years, and so we're learning a lot about the product model. So if you looked at our results, we will be profitable, but we're doing the same thing we did on the auto side. We're getting very surgical in our segmentation to understand the right rate for each home.
Are you thinking of getting into the life insurance business? If you're in the other insurance businesses, why not get into life insurance?
Well, right now we have a great relationship with an unaffiliated partner that we get a commission when we send them to the company, and that's been working really well. And we actually are considering that. We have a life insurance company filed in Ohio. More to come on that.
People say that there's eventually going to be driverless or autonomous cars. And of course, the theory is they will never have an accident because they're perfectly programmed. Is that something you worry about, is cars that don't have accidents, or you're not going to worry about that right now?
I don't worry about it. I mean, from a society perspective, you want to have less accidents. It's good for society. Everyone has been affected by someone who's been in an auto accident. What I think about, I don't put my head in the sand, but what I think about is timing, realistic timing. That's also one of the reasons why I think about not just executing on our current plan, but expanding and exploring other possibilities, adjacencies to grow our business. I will tell you, though, when you look back at some of the headlines in 2012 that say this type of car is going to be fully autonomous by 2020 or 2015, it'll take longer. And I know that. That said, again, we're preparing for a possible smaller auto insurance industry. But again, we have so many opportunities with other adjacent models, including home and some of the other things we've talked about, whether it's TNC or commercial or small business, all the things that we've expanded to in the last couple of years.
Now, Elon Musk has said he's going to have an autonomous car out there at some point in the not-too-distant future. And he's also said, anybody that's an insurance agent, why don't you call me up, because we want to hire insurance agents. We're going to be in the automobile insurance business. Is that something you're worried about a lot?
Not really.
Because?
I think people I love our culture, and I think they love working here, and I think that we have a huge future. I think that the technology is absolutely there, and I can see a car going from point A to B in a geo-fenced area, but there's a lot to be done. I think it'll be a little bit longer than most people had predicted even years ago.
When you were able to go into your office, you were well known for walking into the cafeteria and sitting down with the average person. Why did you do that? Why didn't you just eat in your office with other executives?
When you break bread with people, they open up to you, not just about great things, but about things they want to change.
About Progressive's background. Progressive, it's a great name. Progressive, that's a very positive word. Was that the original name of the company? And when was the company started?
Yes, it was the original name. The company was founded in 1937 by Joe Lewis and Jack Green, and they were two attorneys in Cleveland, and they didn't know what they wanted to do, but they wanted to be able to serve the non-standard customers in Cleveland that needed insurance. And so they borrowed $10,000 from Joe Lewis's mother-in-law, and that's how Progressive was born. And you might know Peter Lewis, who ran the company for a long, long time. He was the second CEO, and then Glenn Renwick, and then myself.
How did you get started at Progressive and at the bottom, pretty much? Is that right?
Yeah, I went to Illinois State University, a marketing degree. I wanted to go into something in marketing, but all through high school and college, I worked in retail. So, and oddly, where I went to school is the home office of State Farm, and everybody was doing internships there. And I'm like, who wants to work in insurance? So I went to a retail company for about 6 months. It was called Furrow Building Materials. It was like think of like a Lowe's or a Home Depot. I was like, what am I doing? I'm mixing paint. I'm actually forklift certified. And I was driving home one day with my hard hat, and I said, I gotta look for something different. And what I wanted to do was work somewhere for a couple of years, pay off my school loans, and then go to get my MBA. So I went home and opened the classified ads. I'd never heard of Progressive. At that time, we were less than $1 billion. And I thought, claims rep trainee, this sounds interesting, $19,000, that'll help me pay off my debt, and made the call.
So the job is to be a claim adjuster.
Correct. So what I would do if I had your claim and you were injured, I would go out and talk to you about your injury and guide you through that. I would crawl under your car and let you know how much it took to get it repaired. I would kind of manage your whole file. I also did special lines, so I was a motorcycle rep, and I basically handled the entire file. So I was in body shops, crawling under cars, and in your house talking to you about your injury.
You've obviously risen up from the lowest position to the highest position, and you had many different positions in between. One of them, which is very unusual to have for a CEO, maybe sadly, is to be the head of human resources. So how did you go from being the head of human resources to being the CEO?
Well, to me, to actually get the CHRO job from having mostly claims experience, during the first 15 years, I had a little bit of sales and a little bit of claims. And Glenn Renwick at the time, my predecessor, interviewed me. It was actually an odd circumstance that I went for it. I wasn't going to, because I don't have any HR experience. I have some maternity leaves, but that's about it. And people kept calling me from around the company saying, you have to go for this. You love diversity, you love metrics, we need this. So finally, I had a pre-interview lunch with Glenn to see if I could even go for it. he put my name in the hat and gave me the opportunity. And I will always say it was a risk for him. He does not say that, but that was really the turning point in my career. And then, he watched me, and I did that for 6 years and made a lot of big changes that we still have now. And the president of claims came open. That's my dream job because I love claims. I love helping customers. I was able to do that. That's 75 cents of every dollar of premium that comes in, you're paying on claims. So that's a big business piece. And then he gave me all things customer facing. So I had our call centers and claims. And then I was COO before the CEO role. So I really credit Glenn for guiding me, giving me opportunities, coaching me, and sponsoring me.
So as head of human resources, you must have instituted some policies that changed the company's face because your company's been voted the #1 most diverse company in the United States in some surveys. Is that something that you implemented and put into practice?
Yes, we started our diversity and inclusion initiatives really in earnest when I was there. We started our first employee resource groups, which was Progressive African American Network and our LGBT+. Now we have 9. We really set forth a strategy of how we're going to make sure everyone can bring their whole self to work. It was a big piece of our culture. And we started looking at the data. We continue to work on it, though. It's not something that you can ever get a check mark. And if you look at senior leadership, we have opportunities there. And in fact, we are working on some really aggressive objectives for the next 5 years with my team to continue to change that.
Your chairman of your board is a woman, and obviously you're a woman. Is there any other Fortune 500 company where the chairman is a woman and the CEO is a woman? There must be none.
I don't think so. And we actually have 12 members of our board, and 6 are women, and 1 of the female is a person of color.
So when you were the COO, and I guess in line to be the CEO, did you think that they were going to give the job to a woman, or you thought this will revert to the normal form and we'll find a nice white male that we can give it to?
I was hoping they'd give it to the person they thought was the best fit for Progressive at the best time. And I remember interviewing with the board for several years during the process. And one of the board members said to me, "So you want to be a CEO?" And I said, "No, I want to be the CEO of Progressive." And that was what really was meaningful to me. So had I not gotten the role, I'd still be here. And there were lots of other opportunities to have a great CEO other than myself.
So when you were able to go into your office, you were well known for walking into the cafeteria and sitting down with the average person. Why did you do that? Why didn't you just eat in your office with other executives?
Because that is my way of getting to know people and really feeling what's going on with the company. And when you break bread with people, they open up to you, not just about great things, but about things they want to change. And for me, I think because of my roots as a claims rep trainee, I always wondered what the execs did. And we don't have an executive cafeteria. All of us eat in the regular cafeteria. It is a very different type of company from that perspective. But literally, it motivated me to be a better leader. Every time I walked up to a table of 5 people and said, "May I join you?" and they gave that horrible look like, "Please no, please no." And I sat down, I had 5 new friends. And to me, it's an important part to be approachable. If you feel connected and you trust your leader, you're going to run through the wall for them.
So when you sit down with people at the employee cafeteria, do they ever say, "By the way, I'm underpaid"? Or is that they never say that?
They'll sometimes talk about how they wish they could make more. What can they do? How can they get there? People are pretty open and honest with me.
What would you say are the leadership qualities that you brought to the table or that you most admire?
I don't always have to be the smartest person in the room. I know collectively what a team needs, and I love having really great debates.
A sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here? It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
I think what we've seen during this period of time is that communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
So as I talk to you, you're not in your office, I assume. You're at your home?
That's correct. I'm in my little library off of our bedroom.
And have you been running Progressive from your little office there for a couple months now?
Yes, ever since mid-March. I go in sometimes once a week just to get my mail and to check things out, but I don't see anyone. And in fact, where I'm sitting here, my son, who's in film school, filmed me weekly for several months so I could send a video out to all of the Progressive people.
Has it been difficult to run the company remotely this way?
It hasn't been difficult for me. It's been unusual, and I don't love it because I love the interaction. I think the biggest part is the claims organization, because that is face-to-face, especially when you're looking at vehicles. But we immediately were able to use videos and pictures to do the best job we could to estimate vehicles, and we're doing pretty well, and I'm very proud of the organization.
When the world comes back, which hopefully it will be in some point in time when we have a vaccine, do you expect that all your employees will come back and work in the offices? Or now do you think you could have people working remotely and maybe save money by not having as much office space? How do you think about this in the future?
Prior to COVID, we already had about 25% of our call center people and some claims people that worked from home just because it worked better for them. I imagine we're doing some surveying as we think about returning of what percentage will that still work for. I think in person, in the office, hallway conversations are so important. So although I think it might increase from that 25%, if you fast forward and there's a vaccine and people feel comfortable, I think a lot of people will come into the office. I think that is something that we work through. We've done a really great job, especially with technology, but I know many people really miss it.
You and your husband have 6 children, right? Is that right?
Yes.
6 children.
Yes, his, hers, and ours.
All right, so when you have 6 children, and you're running a company, isn't that kind of complicated? I mean, how do you have time in the day to do anything else?
It was very complicated as I was growing, going up through the ranks, and my husband worked as well. When I was in HR for a couple of years, we met at Progressive, so he worked there. We both had travel jobs, and at one point he said, when our oldest was going into high school, he said, one of us probably needs to stay home. I think you have a longer runway. And so he decided to stay home. But I think I treat it like everything else. Assume something might go wrong. And so when we were both traveling and I knew I had a big presentation, I knew that morning I would go into somebody's room and someone would have an ear infection. And so I created a network of friends that stayed home, and I did an old-fashioned bartering system. So if you could take Emma, for a couple of hours while I do this presentation, I will babysit your kids and you and your husband can go out on the weekend. I always had plan B, C, and D, just like you do in business.
What would you say are the leadership qualities that you brought to the table or that you most admire?
I think the ones I brought to the table were being genuine, being authentic, communicating, all the time, painting the picture of where I want the company to go. And I think that's really important. I think people, you're only a leader if people want to follow you. So do people want to follow you? Do you have, a great attitude, but also a certain paranoia to make sure that we're always doing well? And for me, I think that what I'm most proud of, and I think why I continue to get jobs after that HR job, was I form really great teams. I don't always have to be the smartest person in the room. I know collectively what a team needs, and I love having really great debates. Right. And the only thing better than those debates are the unity, the power in the unity when you come out and you're solidified as a management team, as a leadership team.
So sometimes people say it's very difficult for women to have it all, to have a family and also have a great professional career. It's obviously possible. You've obviously done it. So what would you say is the trick to having it all and getting it all done, if you were to give advice to some younger woman?
I think there's things you don't give up. So Jack played high school and college football. It was important for me to go to as many games as I could of his, and I worked my way around that so I could do that. And sometimes that meant working, at 10 o'clock at night to catch up on things, but it was worth it because my kids tell me, even now, they're like, you went to more things than most stay-at-home moms, because I was so obsessed with making sure I got to almost everything.
So if you were to go to a football game or something like that with your kids, do people come up to you and say, you're the CEO of Progressive, or you try to avoid telling people you're the CEO of Progressive when you go to those kind of family events?
It's funny because my husband says all the time, why do you play 20 games with everyone? Because people will say, where do you work? And I'll say, for an insurance company. Oh, where? In Cleveland. What do you do? I'm corporate. So I'll do all these things. So finally I'm like, okay, I'm a CEO. What I have found, if you're on a plane, when you used to be on planes, or you're somewhere, a good way to not get in the conversation is they'll say, what do you do? And I say, I sell insurance. And then no one talks to you. So I've found the right thing. People, I live in a smaller town, and my kids went to a small Catholic school, so everybody knows me. When I got the job, the day that it was announced, I was headed to our son's school after the work day to go to his lacrosse game. And our PR department kept saying, the Wall Street Journal wants to talk to you. This place wants to talk to you. And I said, I'm headed to a lacrosse game. Let me call my mom. Let me call my sisters. Let me enjoy this. And I finally said, stop calling me, because I wanted to be present in the moment. And actually, I talked to my 5 other children, and Jack was on the field, and during halftime I went up and I said hi, and I went to tell him, and I said, hey, I need to tell you some news. He goes, I know, Mrs. CEO, it's you're trending on Twitter.
Suppose somebody came to you from Ohio and said, you run one of the best companies in Ohio, you should be governor of Ohio. Would you have any interest in running for office?
I think government would frustrate me. I like to get things done. I like to move forward, and I'm a big believer in compromise. So for me, I don't think government is in the future for me. I think I'd love to do some philanthropy, maybe a board or two. I'm on a public board now, and do some things with my husband to help the country.
And the higher calling of private equity, that doesn't appeal to you?
I'll let you do that.
I'm David Weston. Bloomberg Television is reinventing one of the most iconic brands in financial television for a new audience. Join me to see the news program for the clever investor. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing.
While I watch your interviews, I know how to do some interviewing.
I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him. I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? The famous fund manager Peter Lynch once said, if you like a product, find out who the owner is because maybe the owner represents a good stock to buy. And on that principle, when I heard that my family kept going to a company in my neighborhood called Fresh Fields, or an organic food chain, I began to say, maybe there's an investment here. And so I looked into it, and it turns out Fresh Fields was looking for some capital. My firm invested. It was a very good investment. We loved the company. We loved the food. And then along came a company called Whole Foods. They said they wanted to buy it. I initially said I didn't want to sell. I was quite happy with the investment. But when I met John Mackey, I realized he had a gifted vision of where this business was going to go. So we did sell, and it turned out he was right. He built an incredible chain, and I still go to the store almost every day. What propelled you to start Saferway and then Whole Foods? I mean, you were at the University of Texas, and did you drop out to do this?
I dropped out of school like 6 times. I've got 120 hours of electives. I just studied whatever I was interested in. But I did not drop out to start this company. I was living in a vegetarian co-op when I was 23 years old. And that's when I had my food awakening, where I really understood for the first time that what you ate affected how you felt and your health and your longevity. And then I became the food buyer at that co-op. And then I went to work for a small natural food store in Austin, and I had found the purpose of my life. I was on fire for healthy eating, organic and natural foods. Came home one day and asked my girlfriend living in the co-op whether we ought to start up our own little store. And she said she thought that would be a lot of fun, cool. And 6 months later, we'd raised $45,000 from friends and family, and we found a location, a small store location in Austin, and we were in business.
So when you started the company, though, did you have the vision of building a global or national company, or did you just say, I'll do a couple stores? What was your original vision?
My original vision was to break even. We were losing money when we started out. The first year, we raised $45,000 in capital. We managed to lose $23,000 of it. So we were lucky to survive. We did much better in the second year, relocated to Whole Foods. No, we had no grand vision. The best way to understand it is we were just passionate about selling natural and organic foods. There was no, we didn't take any business classes. We weren't MBAs. We just were passionate. We were on fire. We were young. I was 24 years old when we started the first store. Renee was 20. So we were just having an adventure. We were playing and having a grocery store. It was so much fun. And then we started learning business, and we got pretty good at it. And then we started to grow it. I will tell you a story, David. So when we did our IPO in 1992, one of the things that the investors want to know, they're trying to build a model of your company. So they want to know, what's the potential? How big could it be? We had 12 stores when we IPO'd, and I thought, I think we could someday have 100 stores. And, we might even be able to do maybe $1 billion in sales someday. Someday we could have that. And they weren't that impressed with that. They didn't think that was going to be that big a company. And of course, we're doing $20 billion in sales now and have 520 stores or thereabouts. So I was very wrong about the upward potential of the business.
At the time, when you were doing this in '78 and the early '80s, was natural food well known as what natural food was, or organic foods? What was the view of them then?
When we were trying to raise venture capital money, we had 3 venture capitalists that invested, and we had a dozen or more turned us down. And I remember one of the guys turning me down saying, yeah, I don't think this business has much of a future. I don't know why he felt so motivated to tell me why he wasn't going to invest, because usually they just say, we're not interested. But he said, I want I want to explain to you. And he said, you guys are just a bunch of hippies and you're selling food to other hippies. I ran into that guy like 8 years later. He told me that was the biggest mistake he'd ever made in his venture capital career. Turned out that it wasn't just selling food to hippies, that it caught on in the upper middle class, and then it spread from there, and yeah, the rest is history, as they say.
So when you dropped out of college, did you say to your father, I'm going to be like Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, and I'm going to build a big company? And did he have a lot of confidence in you to do that?
Well, Mark Zuckerberg wasn't alive when I started the company, so he wouldn't have referred to him. And Bill Gates was just started Microsoft 2 years before I started SaferWay, so my dad would never have heard of that. My dad was very supportive. He was just wanted his son to do something he was passionate about, he could see I was very excited about this. So he was actually very supportive.
In the early years, he helped you somewhat as an accounting professor. He gave you some advice?
My dad was my mentor since I didn't have that business background. I always say that from the year 1978 to 1994, I never made a move at Whole Foods without checking with my dad. In 1994, I had turned 40 years old, and we'd gone public 2 years before, and my dad was now wealthy, on paper, with the Whole Foods stock that he'd bought, and he wanted to hold on to what he had, and I wanted to grow the business. I just thought, we can really grow this thing. And so we used to fight in our board meetings. We were screaming at each other at public board meetings. And finally, I said, Dad, here's what I want you to do. I want you to sell half of your stock tomorrow. I'm firing. I don't want you on the board anymore. I want you to sell half your stock tomorrow and take the other half and leave it in the company, because we're going to grow Whole Foods. It's going to be a big enterprise someday. So he did that. Barry took my advice, sold half the stock the next day. He was very hurt. His feelings were hurt. I remember him telling me, I said, I'm 40 years old. I'm ready to run the company by myself without you. And he said, 40 years old? You don't know anything. You're only 40. It turned out he was right. I didn't know very much when I was 40. I know a lot more today than I knew then. But he was wrong about the potential growth of Whole Foods, because the company took off after that, and he made a lot more money on that half that he kept in.
So when you're growing the company and making it to a national company and a well-known brand, was the biggest problem that people still weren't convinced that natural foods and organic foods were good for you? Was it that the price you had to charge was somewhat more expensive than, let's say, Safeway? Or was it the Safeways of the world that were going to compete with you and they were going to have organic foods? Or was just getting cash from investors to help you grow? What were the biggest problems?
The biggest problem was the limitation of the marketplace initially, because it's a consciousness thing. So when we opened up in a hip area where you had a lot of younger sort of counterculture people, or bohemian people, the stores would take off from the very beginning. But when we went into a suburb, like when we opened a store in Greenville Avenue in Dallas, it took off. But when we went up to Richardson, a suburb in North Dallas, back this in 1988, it was really slow. The store started really slow. The suburban stores just didn't have enough what we'd call natural food consciousness to really be successful. It took us years to grow those businesses.
Now, when Whole Foods came along, and it was very popular in many areas, it became known in some circles as whole paycheck. I'm sure you've heard that before. And so that the implication was that your prices were expensive, but I assume that your response is, but you're selling higher quality or more complicated things, and your prices are not a big drag on your overall ability to get people to come into the store. Is that right?
It's a very good question. Of course, I do hear that all the time, and it's a little bit of a complex answer. So for most of our history, in the 40-year history, we probably only got serious competition in the last 15 years. So the first 25 years we existed, very few people sold the same products that we sold. So there was no big deal. But then as we got more successful, we got more competition. And one of the ways they competed with us was to undercut us in price. And of course, one of the things Whole Foods knows it needs to do is it needs to meet the competitive marketplace in terms of price. And that is one of the reasons we wanted to merge or sell to Amazon, is Jeff and his team think long term. So it was going to be very difficult for us to lower our prices and hold on to our company, because when you lower prices initially, it actually hurts your sales and hurts your profitability. Something you were selling for $1, now you're selling for 90 cents. So it looks like your business is declining. Now, you'll get it back over time as people realize that they get better prices, but it's a painful transition. Now, with Amazon, we've already dropped our prices 3 times, and we're going to keep dropping them. So Amazon that's another great benefit of the merger for us. We are getting more and more price competitive, and Amazon is willing to be patient and let that play out over time.
Every acquisition looks great at the time you do them. Now you've had a couple years behind you. Is it working out, and are you happy with it?
Do we love everything about Amazon? No, there's about 2% we don't love, but we love almost everything. 98% is pretty good. That's a pretty good marriage.
A couple years ago, you had, as you wrote in your book on conscious leadership, a hedge fund, kind of an activist hedge fund, came along, and they were agitating for a higher price. And ultimately, you looked at some alternatives, and one of them that seemed the best was selling to Amazon. Is that right?
That's correct. We had, the activist investors, Jana Partners, I met with them, and they basically said, we're going to take over your board, and we're going to throw you out. We're going to sell the company. So why don't you just save us all a lot of anguish and let's just agree to do that. And so, of course, we didn't want to sell the company to the highest bidder, and we had to think about our different alternatives. So one was going private, potentially. Another one was to put the company in friendly hands, like we contacted Warren Buffett, for example. Another one was to maybe fight Jana and fight to maintain control. And then, as I was trying to think about what the best solution was, one morning I just woke up and it popped in my brain. What about Amazon? What about Amazon? I'd met Jeff a year before, really admired him, still do. I thought these guys would be perfect. I've heard they want to get into the grocery business. This would be a good opportunity for them to get into it. Their technology could help Whole Foods. So we contacted Amazon. A couple days later, we flew up to Seattle, met with Jeff and his team. We had an amazing first conversation, lasted about 3 hours. It was like we were finishing each other's sentences, all the things we could do together. We got super excited. Just a few days after that, they sent a whole team to Austin to continue the conversations. 6 weeks after that first meeting, we'd signed a merger agreement. We negotiated the price, signed the merger agreement, and we were on our way.
So every acquisition looks great at the time you do them. Now you've had a couple years behind you. Is it working out, and are you happy with it?
You know, the metaphor I like to use for a merger is it's like a marriage, particularly between big companies. So we had a love at first sight and a whirlwind romance. So it's a fair question to ask, how's that working out now? It's about 3 years later now, as a matter of fact. And is it perfect? You know, no. It's like I sometimes say when people ask me this question, I say, do I love absolutely everything about my wife? I've been married 30 years. And the answer is no. I love about 98%, but it's 2% that, really bothers me. And I'd say it's kind of similar with Amazon. Do we love everything about Amazon? No, there's about 2% we don't love, but we love almost everything. 98% is pretty good. That's a pretty good marriage. And Amazon, the merger is working out great for us. We're a much better company today than we were pre-Amazon.
So Amazon's about getting people to buy things and ship into their home. You've been about getting people to come into your stores and buy a lot of things that they might see while they're walking around. So is that a different kind of culture, and how's it worked out in that respect?
There's overlap in the cultures. We're both very customer focused. There are differences in cultures, but one of the things that Amazon has done, which has been fantastic, and one reason the merger's worked well, they respect our culture. They're not trying to change our culture. Now, our culture is changing because we're taking on lots of attributes that Amazon has, and that has a change in our culture, but they're not forcing us or coercing us. We're doing it voluntarily because, to make our company better. So that's why we're evolving, but I think in a healthy, constructive way. People ask me, hey, John, if you could do it all over again, would you make the same decision? And the answer is yes, we'd make the exact same decision.
So I know whenever I go to Whole Foods, which is about a mile from my house, and I go there very frequently, they always ask me, are you a Prime member? So has being Prime helped a lot in your business, the Prime membership club?
A high percentage of our customers are Prime members, and so they like that. Now, there is a minority of customers who are not, and of course, every time they get asked if they're a Prime member, of course, they don't necessarily like that they keep, getting asked that question. But on balance, remember, the majority of our transactions are coming from Prime members, so that's been a good thing for them. They're getting better prices and better deals. The main way Amazon's helped Whole Foods, though, is technology. I mean, particularly now with COVID, the amount of deliveries that we're doing and store pickups and deliveries, I mean, it's tripled in the last year. I mean, we're doing a large percentage of our business online now, and we didn't really have, it's a small percentage before Amazon acquired us.
So let's talk about COVID for a moment. When COVID came, many people were worried that retail stores would have to shut down, but actually food retail stores have benefited, you could argue, because people need to eat a lot more, I guess, or at least they're going down to buy staples. What was it like to manage under COVID at the outset?
So the main thing to understand is almost all food retailer sales are up, primarily because restaurant sales are down so much, right? People aren't eating out as much, so they're eating at home more. And that's been good for pretty much all food retailers. That's been good for Whole Foods as well. Maybe a little bit less good for us because we do a lot of prepared foods in our stores. And so that's way down. People are not going to our salad bars, our hot food bars. They're not going, and our offices are shut down around our stores. So we're not getting that traffic that we used to get in. But on the other hand, overall sales are up substantially because everything else is up so much.
Has it made the way you're going to manage in the future different?
Again, it's helped us tremendously for being online sales, and that will continue. We won't go back to, once people get a taste of that, they like it. In Amazon, if you're a Prime member, delivery's free. So I think that's going to be a permanent shift for many people. The hardest thing about managing the business now, there's an element of fear, right? People are scared of the virus. Everybody's masked up. We require masks for all of our team members and all customers. And those masks, I'm in Austin, it's 100 degrees outside right now, and wearing a mask around is not very fun or pleasant thing to do. And people have been shut down in their homes, and that's, we see what's happening. There's unrest around the country. So it's been this is, I don't know about you, but I'd have to say 2020 is the weirdest year of my entire life.
You've been the CEO of this company for 42 years. Is it your expectation to do this another 5, 10, 15 years, or what else might you do?
It's like Whole Foods is my daughter, and I literally married my daughter off to the richest man in the world. And I just kind of came along to make sure the marriage settled in well.
Reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
We have some good news in terms of vaccines and a chance to overcome the health crisis. but we are not there yet.
We need the fiscal stimulus, and we need it relatively quickly, because I can see where the second wave's coming. You can see consumer spending beginning to get impacted again.
What we need is surveillance to be stronger. We need public health measures, because you have no other way at the beginning. This is your best weapon, and you need to use it well.
The good news is that both the vaccines and the therapeutics, in particular the antibodies, are coming along and will start to bring that number way down.
We don't just need more investment in public health. We must also rethink how we value health.
I do believe a targeted fiscal stimulus is going to be in order to really begin a more equalized economy.
Valuations, particularly, sort of the technology landscape, have gotten to some pretty extraordinary levels. So I think it's not a surprise. I don't think it's any indication of the beginning of the end, but I do think markets don't like uncertainty.
When you go to a Whole Foods anywhere in the country, you have about 500 stores or so in the country now. I assume you're instantly recognized. They have a picture of you there when you walk in, so they know who you are.
Now I go in, I'm wearing a mask. Nobody knows who I am. I have a perfect disguise. But no, they recognize me, mostly because they know I'm coming, generally. I do some surprise visits occasionally, and it's just, but I get recognized very quickly.
So when you go in and you say, well, this is not set up the right way, or you should charge something different, do they listen to you?
You know what I've learned, David? I've learned painfully that whether I like it or not, I'm the father of Whole Foods, and the team members really want Dad to love the store. So I've learned to sort of moderate my criticisms, because they really tried to make the store look good because they knew I was coming. So I just try to stay positive and connect with the people. And then maybe after I leave, I will tell the leadership of the region, I didn't like this, or this.
You've built one of the most famous companies in the United States, but you don't own a lot of it relative to what some of the other founders of large companies have done. Does that make you lose sleep at night, or you're okay with that?
You know, something I learned pretty early in life, one of the most destructive emotions there is in the world is envy. Envy will poison your soul. I learned to deal with envy of people envying me, and I learned to deal with my own envy a long time ago. And it's far better to just be grateful. I've had an amazing life. I am a very wealthy man by any objective standard. So there are people wealthier than me. There are other entrepreneurs that made more money. So what? I mean, I have everything I need or could ever want. So greed, envy, those things poison our souls. And so there's no place for envy. I am happy for them. I'm happy that they've had successful lives. And yeah, so have I. Life is good.
In your book, you talk about the importance of a certain type of leadership, where you are trying to be what you call a conscious leader, which is to say, worry about long-term purpose of a company, not just profit. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, in the book, we talk about purpose first. Put purpose first. That Whole Foods has always been purpose-driven since the very beginning. We always, we wanted to make the world a better place. In natural and organic foods, we wanted people to eat healthy. And then what we learned over time is the importance of leading with love, to care about your people. And so we have a chapter about leading with love. And then we learned, of course, the importance of integrity. In business, in life in general, integrity is so important. You have to do what you say, you have to be trustworthy, you have to be authentic, you have to be honorable, you have to have honor.
Well, you talk a lot about the importance of culture and having a certain culture. You developed a Whole Foods culture. Has it changed under Amazon, or you've been able to keep your culture? And what is that culture?
Well, cultures are like living, they're like living entities, and they change over time, they evolve. So yes, at merger 3 years ago, our culture has evolved in the last 3 years. But culture comes from your values, it comes from your purpose, and it comes from the way you lead the company, what your leadership principles are. So Whole Foods has a very healthy culture. We were named one of the 100 best companies to work for 20 consecutive years. And our culture is still very healthy. I will say COVID is challenging the culture. For one thing, we can't get around and visit the stores so easily right now. So more stores are kind of on their own than ever before. And wearing a mask every day is stressful for people. And so there's a lot of fear, and we're in urban areas, and there have been a lot of protests this summer. It's a restless world out there right now.
You've been the CEO of this company for 42 years. Very few people are CEOs of publicly traded companies or companies as large as yours for that long. Is it your expectation to do this another 5, 10, 15 years, or what else might you do? Would you go into government? Would you run for office? What else would you do?
I will not run for office, and I will not go into government. Think about it this way. Whole Foods is like, I don't have biological children. So Whole Foods is like, for me, it's the equivalent of my child. It's kind of grown up now, right? It's not a baby anymore, but parents love their children their whole lives, even when they're grown up. I will leave Whole Foods sometime in the next few years. I haven't announced the retirement date yet. And COVID, it's a crisis. So I'm dealing with the crisis here for that. And I always make this joke that it's like Whole Foods is my daughter. And I literally married my daughter off to the richest man in the world. And I just kind of came along to make sure the marriage settled in well. And I'm still here, but I know that the time will come eventually for me to leave. It's just not yet. And I'm not quite sure when it will be.
So what I tell people all the time is the hardest thing in life is to be happy. Happiness is the most elusive thing in life, and you seem like a very happy person.
The secret to happiness is gratitude.
Right. You wrote that in your book.
Yes, gratitude. And it was like you asked me that question earlier about, how do you feel? You could have made a lot more money as big as your corporation is. Other entrepreneurs make more money. Envy poisons happiness. Gratitude is the key. I'm grateful for what I have, not envious for what I don't have. I mean, I have good health. I have an amazing marriage. I have great friends. I have this amazing business that I'm part of. I have materially and financially everything I'll ever need. Life is blessing. I'm just so happy to be alive. It's an amazing, life is beautiful and amazing, and I'm just grateful every day. And I get up happy to be alive. And so there you have it. That's my key.
Well, you should bottle that and put that in your stores.
If I could bottle that, I would be a billionaire.
Just give you a sense of the real-time action, the 10-year yield tumbling now 11 basis points, so continuing in this knee-jerk risk-off feel.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Are you worried that people won't take the vaccine?
We remain concerned about vaccine hesitancy.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here?
It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
This is my kitchen table and also my filing system. Over much of the past 3 decades, I've been an investor. The highest calling of mankind, I've often thought, was private equity. And then I started interviewing. Well, I watch your interviews, so I know how to do some interviewing. I've learned in doing my interviews how leaders make it to the top.
I asked him how much he wanted. He said $250. I said fine. I didn't negotiate with him, and I did no due diligence.
I have something I'd like to sell, and how they stay there. You don't feel inadequate now because being only the second wealthiest man in the world, is that right? Everyone has no doubt used Band-Aids or Tylenol. Those products are well-known products produced by Johnson & Johnson. But Johnson & Johnson is also a giant in many other areas. It's now taking a leading role in preparing a vaccine for COVID-19. Its CEO is Alex Gorsky, a West Point-trained former military man who has done an incredible job over the last 8 years making this company the most valuable healthcare company in the world. Now, some people say the most commonly spoken words in the English language today are, "Can you hear me?" because of the Zoom phenomenon. But I assume in your case, the most commonly asked question of you is, when is the vaccine coming? So you must get asked this about every hour on the hour. So why don't I just do this as well? When is your vaccine coming?
Well, look, it's usually about every 15 minutes, actually, that I get asked that. And let me start by saying I could not be more proud of the incredible work that our scientists and our engineers have been doing over the past 9 months to put us into the position that we are today with a vaccine. I mean, to think that, what would ordinarily take 5 or 7 years, we've been able to do in, a matter of months is quite remarkable. And, without their hard work and dedication, probably 40,000 of our 150,000 employees, mostly in our factories and facilities and our laboratories have still been working. And they've been going literally around the clock to make that possible. And look, we still have a lot of work to do, but we made a lot of progress, and we'll be finding out a lot more in the coming weeks and months. But, consistent with what we talked about just recently when we announced the start of our phase 3 trial, we would expect by late this year, early next year, we should be in a position to begin reviews with regulatory authorities to see if our vaccine is in fact safe, effective, and something that could be considered for an emergency use authorization here in the United States and more likely around the world.
So even if you have emergency use authorization, to be realistic about it, it's not going to be ready until next year. Is that right?
I think that's a good time frame to be planning on. And again, a lot of it's going to depend on what we find in phase 3. And David, as you know, that can depend on the incidence of the virus, of course, because that has an impact on the statistical analysis that you'll be using in your study. It's going to depend on how well our vaccine is actually doing in the study and what kind of efficacy rates we hit. But I think for planning purposes, if you think about late 2020 and early 2021, I think those are the kind of timelines that are likely most realistic.
Okay. Now, you and a number of other CEOs of vaccine manufacturers have issued a letter saying basically you don't want to be politically pressured to have a certain date and so forth. Can you articulate why you felt the need for that letter?
Well, look, we think this is an incredibly important time for the pharmaceutical industry, let alone each of our companies. And it's absolutely critical during a time when, unfortunately, everything becomes politicized, that we rely on data, that we rely on science, that we rely on well-established regulatory guidelines to guide all of our decisions regarding the development and the actual utilization of these vaccines. And we thought that collectively, making a very explicit statement about our commitment, our pledge to following those established guidelines was very important to maintain the trust, to maintain the confidence of people around the world regarding the safety and efficacy and actual accessibility of these vaccines.
In a recent survey, I read that was done of Americans that only 19% are yet prepared today to take a vaccine if it's available. Is that a surprise to you that so many people are not yet ready to take it? Is that because of the perceived politicization of it?
Well, David, unfortunately, no, it's not a surprise, and it's actually fairly consistent, in fact, with what you see with the annual flu vaccine that can range from anywhere from about 20% and perhaps in some of the best states as high as 40 or 50%. And look, I understand some of the skepticism and cynicism. There's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of concern about that people genuinely have, based upon some of the readings that you can find out there. But I think that demonstrates is just how important it is for us to, number one, to work closely with healthcare authorities, whether it's the CDC, BARDA, the NIH, the FDA, agencies outside the United States, to follow those appropriate protocols. I think, secondly, it's going to take a lot of education. And that's, by the way, not only the responsibility, I believe, of the pharmaceutical industry, but it's going to require the government. It's going to require perhaps even businesses, other stakeholders, to make sure that we are sharing the facts. Look, I'm cautiously optimistic that as we provide more data, more information, that as people see the potential impact, positive impact that this could have in terms of returning back to a more normal state in some way, that people will find the comfort and confidence to have a vaccine, because ultimately that it's going to be very important as we think about returning to a new kind of normal.
Now, the federal government has poured billions of dollars into getting a vaccine developed and provided you and other companies with that money to help you facilitate the production of this. Do you think that the taxpayers should get a benefit by either getting very low-cost vaccines or free vaccines?
Well, yes, David. Look, I think it's in the public's best interest that we're seeing this kind of public-private partnership. I mean, it would be very difficult for us to make the kind of advancements and accelerate the timelines that we're doing right now were it not for the partnership that we're seeing, not only in terms of funds being provided, but in terms of literally the day-to-day interactions that are taking place between regulators and scientists across many of these platforms. In our case, from the very beginning, we made a pledge that we would do this on a not-for-profit basis. And yes, we are working with the government, and we've accepted government funds, but we also recognize that as Johnson & Johnson, the world's largest healthcare company, that's important for us at this very unique time to do it on a not-for-profit basis so that we can give as many people access around the world as possible. So that's the approach that we're taking.
Now, there's a fear in some circles that wealthy people will get the vaccine quicker than people that are not wealthy. And you have, with other CEOs and other healthcare officials and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, signed a letter essentially saying you're committed to making certain that it doesn't go only to wealthy people and only to people in the United States. Can you explain why you wanted to have that letter and how you're going to make sure that happens?
Well, look, the only way we're going to beat this virus is if we have global distribution, and no one is safe, frankly, if the entire world is not provided access. And so we are absolutely committed to doing this in a very ethical, in a very just way. And we've worked very hard to make agreements, clearly with governments like the United States and Europe, Japan, the developed countries. But we're also working hand in hand with other pharmaceutical companies, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to ensure that developing countries also have got access.
Looking back, what would you say that the CDC or the FDA or the White House or HHS should have done differently?
Almost all of us have underestimated the dramatic impact of this outbreak.
generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
So as we talk today, the big news is that President Trump and the First Lady have contracted the coronavirus. Is that a surprise to you that that could possibly happen?
Well, David, look, I think it demonstrates that we're all vulnerable and we still all need to be very vigilant and diligent in the actions that we're taking to prevent this virus from spreading any further.
So you, as the CEO of the largest healthcare company in the United States, I think it's the 10th largest company by market cap in the entire United States, market value of about almost $400 billion, you have to be very careful because I think it would look bad, wouldn't it, if the CEO of the largest healthcare company got the virus? So what do you do to protect yourself?
Well, David, look, I think all of us have a huge responsibility to take care of ourselves, and certainly those of us like myself fortunate to be in this kind of a position where we have responsibility for others have got to make sure that we put the safety of our employees, of our friends, of our families first in everything that we do. And look, that starts with the simple things. And I think one of the things that we've learned most through this pandemic is by making sure that we're using social distancing, that we're wearing masks, that we're washing our hands, that we're doing everything we can to prevent the spread of the virus are the most important steps that we can take to actually bringing an end to this pandemic and dealing with it for the long term.
Now, vaccines are what everybody has been focused on, but there's also therapeutics. So for people who might have already contracted the disease or already have the virus, is there any progress being made on therapeutics that might help people that already have the disease?
Well, David, that's a great point. There is no one silver bullet here. And I think what is really important for everyone to understand, it's going to take a holistic approach because likely we're going to be dealing with this not only as a pandemic, but it's going to be endemic for several years going forward. So in all likelihood, it's going to take a combination of therapeutics for patients who are actually sick, vaccines to prevent it from happening in the first place, and last but not least, the hospital protocols that I think have done a great job. Still much more work to do in terms of reducing actual mortality and morbidity.
So things that have been talked about are remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, and also convalescent plasma. But generally today, you wouldn't say that those things are therapeutics that are going to solve the problem. Is that right?
Not each and of themselves. I think there will be various opportunities you use them. And look, we're going to learn, for example, with convalescent plasma, when and where are they most effective? In what patient population? Is it an older population? Could they be used, for example, in an elder care facility where you're seeing an outbreak in a more aggressive way? Should antivirals be used earlier in the disease? And I think we're developing a lot of information as we speak, and we're going to learn a lot more in the coming weeks and months.
Hindsight is always 20/20, it is said. But looking back, what would you say that the CDC or the FDA or the White House or HHS should have done differently? Is there anything that you would recommend to somebody in the future that they do differently if they were overseeing this kind of pandemic response?
Well, you're right. When we look backwards, things always seem clear. And, I think there's a few lessons. And I would also say that almost all of us have underestimated the dramatic impact of this outbreak. I mean, if you would have asked most people 8 or 9 months ago if you would ever see the kind of impact that we're, seeing around the world right now, few would have gotten it right. But I think there are lessons to be learned. First and foremost, I think, is the importance, David, of global public health. And I think going forward, we're going to understand much better that, if we don't have global public health security, we don't have national security, we don't have economic security, and we will not have security as society. So I think the importance of being prepared, making sure that, we've got the kind of protocols in place, that we have certain products pre-positioned, and frankly, also move from a maniacal focus on efficiency and effectiveness in certain cases to one more of resiliency and sustainability, particularly for these kind of situations.
Were even you surprised how dependent maybe Johnson & Johnson and the healthcare industry was on manufacturing things in China and offshore, so that for PPE and other things, we really had to almost beg the Chinese to get us some material. Will that change in the future? And were you surprised at the extent that we were so dependent on offshore production?
Well, yes, and I think this is an important lesson for all industries, not only the healthcare industry, but every supply chain. And the good news is, over the last several decades, the globally integrated supply chain has reaped tremendous rewards, and again, in terms of efficiency and effectiveness for so many different companies. However, I think it's important for us to realize that we've got to make sure that we've got the kind of redundancy and resiliency when these types of situations arise. And so we're looking hard across our supply chain as we speak to say, look, what are the things where we can still take advantage of so many of the efficiencies from what we were doing before, but what other things do we need to think about reshoring? What other capabilities do we need to think to have more local to ensure that, in future pandemics, we're all better positioned and better prepared?
If the doctor says you need a Band-Aid here, I'll give you a shot, and he puts a Band-Aid on that's not a Band-Aid, it's some other company's product, you take it off?
Well, I actually had that happen one time. I had a bicycling accident where I had to get some stitches in my hand. And of course, when I went to the local hospital, I made sure that they were our sutures.
We explore the trends, investments, and competition of the European ETF industry. Join us on Bloomberg ETF IQ Europe.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
Let's talk about how you went from a graduate of the West Point to becoming the CEO of this company. So where did you grow up?
Well, David, I couldn't have imagined, 20, 40, 60 years ago that I'd ever be in this role or position. But I was actually born in Kansas City, Kansas. My grandparents, for the most part, were immigrants and opened up small stores, worked in meatpacking plants in Kansas City. And I was there through my early years. And then my father was moved with his job when I was about 12 years old to a little town in the Lower Peninsula of Michigan.
What propelled you to say, I want to go to West Point?
Well, look, I was very fortunate, and both my mother and father worked. My father started as a salesman in a foods company, Gerber Baby Food, and kind of worked his way up the ladder. But he was also a Korean War veteran, and he stayed in the Army Reserves. And my mother taught special education students, and so I thought it was natural when you were growing up that your father not only went to work and your mother went to work, but also that, one weekend a month that he would put a uniform on to go serve his country. And I was really inspired by that. And I was one of 6 children. And I also knew that going to a place like West Point not only would afford me an opportunity for a great education and a career, but it was also certainly an economical way to do it, and one where I could pay my own way through. And so I put all that together, and I found that to be a really attractive path, and I was fortunate that that's what I was able to follow.
So when you graduated, did you say, now I want to be a healthcare executive, or how long did you stay in the military?
No. I graduated, and like all of my classmates, I went into the Army as a lieutenant. I had an assignment in Europe for my very first role, and then I was stationed back in the United States, actually out of Fort Ord, California, in the 7th Infantry Division. And I spent 6 years where I ended my service as a captain. I was a battery commander in a rapid deployment force unit, and that's when I made my decision to exit the Army and join Johnson & Johnson.
Now, you also got an MBA from Wharton.
Yes.
When did you have time to do that?
Well, I started, when I left the Army, I started as a sales representative at Johnson & Johnson. It was part of a leadership development program, but I felt getting the skills, understanding the customers, really learning, what doctors and surgeons and nurses and people who are using our products on a day-to-day basis, that was an important experience to get. And then I went into sales management, later into marketing, but I also realized that, look, I had studied engineering in college. And I realized that if I was going to have the skills in business that I felt were really necessary, that, going back and getting exposed in much more depth to accounting, to finance, to strategy and other things was going to be important. And I was very fortunate that they supported my attendance at the executive MBA program at Wharton, where I went and completed that, at an early point in my career.
So you started out marketing with a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson. At the time that you did that, did you say, well, somebody who starts out as a marketing person for this subsidiary surely should rise up to be the CEO someday? Did you ever imagine at that point that you could rise up, or you always had that as your goal?
No, I did realize, however, that getting exposure and experience with as many different aspects of our business early on in my career was important. And marketing was one place where you could interface with research and development to really understand our products, where you would engage with your finance counterparts, your supply chain people. And so it was really the kind of position that exposed you to almost all aspects of the organization. And look, at that time, I aspired to perhaps be able to run one of our divisions. And from there, things took on a life of their own.
So you've now been the CEO since 2012, so about 8 years or so. And for most CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, unless they were the founder of them, generally 5, 6 years is fairly average. So you're 8, but you're very young and you're obviously in good shape. So is your plan to do this for a long time in the future?
Well, look, David, I'm very fortunate to be the 7th CEO of Johnson & Johnson. You're right. I think one of the great characteristics of the company is the long tenure that my predecessors have and the continuity, the consistency, and the kind of long-range thinking that it imbued into the organization. And I'm proud to have been part of that. And look, I'm as excited today about what I'm seeing in terms of science and technology and the potential for the patients. I mean, look what we're doing with the vaccine. We couldn't have even imagined that, with about 10 months ago. And so that it's a constant stream of new opportunities, challenges that you're facing along the way. But look, like everybody, I would always consider ways of how could you continue to serve other stakeholders? How could you continue to serve others? But you know what? I think I've got the best job in the world most days.
Now, you are a fitness expert, or a person who cares a lot about fitness. You're always running, you're exercising, and so I assume during this period of time you're doing it even more just to stay in shape. Is that right? Do you run a lot, or do you exercise a lot every day?
Yes, I do, David. And look, I learned a long time ago, even during my time in the military, that one of the most important things you can do to ensure that if by chance you were wounded was to be healthy in the first place. And it's interesting because I think one of the things that we're learning about this disease, of course, is that the healthier you are, if you in fact should contract the disease, likely the better prepared you're going to be able to survive and get through it in a much better manner. And, look, like many others, I've been doing my best to deal with this situation, not only working out of the house, but taking care of myself. But yes, I always put a priority on, trying to take care of ourselves, stay healthy, get the kind of rest that you need, eat the right way. And I think doing all these things not only happen or help in your daily life, but certainly are going to affect in a situation like COVID-19 as well.
So when you're running the biggest healthcare company in the United States, I guess you're always worried that somebody might see you eating a French fry or a Big Mac, or you gained an extra pound or something. Do you feel you got to be very careful because everybody's watching you of who you are and the company you're running?
No, I don't worry about that. Look, I think what's important about life and so many things is balance. And I tend to follow an axiom that, look, during the week, especially given my travel schedule and the demands, is I tend to be pretty strict, about what I eat and the kind of rituals I put in place. It just keeps me on pace, whether I'm here in New Brunswick or whether I'm in China or traveling in other places around the world. But hey, on the weekend, of course, I like to have a burger from time to time or that steak. And that's why I work so hard in trying to keep fit along the way. And I find by having that balance, hey, I can take care of myself, but I can also have fun.
So you're in pretty good shape, obviously. But you eventually, I guess you have you go to the doctor for annual physicals or something like that. If the doctor says you need a Band-Aid here, I'll give you a shot, and he puts a Band-Aid on that's not a Band-Aid, it's some other company's product, do you take it off, or do you say you can only use Johnson & Johnson products on me?
Well, I actually had that happen one time. I had a bicycling accident where I had to get some stitches in my hand. And of course, when I went to the local hospital, I made sure that they were our sutures. And look, I've had my hip replaced. I have one of our products in my hip, and it feels great. And it was a life changer for me once I had that procedure done.
Well, listen, I appreciate your giving us this much time. I hope the vaccine comes as soon as possible and in a healthy and good way and safe for everybody.
You can rest assured that we're going to be working 24/7, doing everything we can to make that possible between now and then.
We have some good news in terms of vaccines and a chance to overcome the health crisis, but we are not there yet.
We need the fiscal stimulus, and we need it relatively quickly, because I can see where the second wave's coming. You can see consumer spending beginning to get impacted again.
What we need surveillance to be stronger. We need public health measures, because you have no other way at the beginning. This is your best weapon, and you need to use it well.
The good news is that both the vaccines and the therapeutics, in particular the antibodies, are coming along and will start to bring that number way down.
We don't just need more investment in public health. We must also rethink how we value health.
I do believe a targeted fiscal stimulus is going to be in order to really begin a more equalized economy.
A very good morning and welcome to Daybreak Australia. I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts in Sydney.
And I'm David Ingles here in Hong Kong, just counting down, of course,